Even after watching the snow fiend swat and latte aside, Leguna felt nothing. Like a night-song forest, his mind slipped into a cold, perfect calm. Eyes fixed on the beast, he accelerated under Davor's speed spell, his outline blurring into a streak of shadow as he closed the distance. The snow fiend had just vented its fury on the woman who'd pestered it. It drew breath to roar again, then fire lanced its shoulder. Leguna appeared on its back, flame blade buried to the hilt. The steel had hit bone, but he wasn't done. He braced, stomped the sword pommel, and drove it a few centimeters deeper. Pain racked the monster. It swept a massive arm backward, but the boy sprang away, leaving the blade lodged tight. The fiend howled, angrier still. Its wild swat had only hammered the weapon deeper. If Leguna wanted his sword back, he'd have to kill the thing. He landed in front of it, pale with exertion. The burst had drained him, but he couldn't stop. He slipped past another strike and kept moving. Not far off, Davor's group finished their own foe and turned, surprised to find the scrawny youth ghosting around the last snow fiend. Always at its flank, always just out of reach. "Young master, should we help?" an attendant asked. Davor hesitated. It was a tidy chance to let trouble solve itself. Then he remembered Analot's power. If she survived and heard he'd stood by, he'd pay dearly. He grit his teeth. "Go. We'll finish it together." A heartbeat later, he was glad he'd chosen caution, and Latte stood up as if nothing had happened. No bruises, no blood. Davor's eyelids twitched. His unease deepened. Leguna continued to harry without striking, slipping and rolling at the beast's side. The snow fiend bellowed, hammering the ground with both arms, never touching even the hem of his clothes. "It's time," Leguna thought. He loosened his fists and rolled clear. "Wait! Hold your attack!" he shouted as Davor's attendant charged. They faltered, confused, then saw he was still focused on the beast. The snow fiend lowered its head to rush and seized up. Thin red lines opened across its hide, then widened. Blood sheeted down, turning white fur scarlet. What is that?" "Now," Leguna said, voice thin but steady. His eyes had lost that empty calm. The dark blue had returned. With the advantage plain, the attendants surged in. Davor swallowed and joined them, glancing once at the panting boy. "Were these two?" And Latte replayed the sequence in her head as she walked to Leguna. "How do you feel?" "Annie, you're fine?" he blurted, craning to check her for injuries. Her skin was flawless. "I triggered stone skin at the last moment," she said, tapping his forehead away. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted. I burned through everything," he admitted. "Why? You want to go deal with Davor?" "I'd love to, but I can't keep up right now." "Rain check." She ignored the jab. "During the fight, did anything feel unusual?" He thought a moment. "I didn't feel anything. No fear, no anger. Just what to do next. If I had to fight it now, my legs would shake." "How did you reach that state?" "I don't know. I thought you were hurt. Got furious. Then I was suddenly calm and focused." She fell silent, then joined the melee. Wounded and wary, the fiend faltered under the combined assault. 5 minutes later it groaned and collapsed. Finally, someone breathed. Leguna sprinted to the corpse and started feeling for his sword. The others watched, baffled, as he strained to pull Flame Blade free. It didn't budge. "Hey, give me a hand," he called to Davor. Their hostility had cooled since the fight. Davor grimaced but waved his men over. Up close, they spotted a thin, blood-colored wire fastened to the hilt and punched deep through the fiend's flesh. Only then did the trick click. Before he'd charged, Leguna had tied a 20-meter mithril wire to the sword and kept the coil in hand. After planting the blade, he'd circled the beast, feeding wire as he ran. Each move tightened the loop, cutting through fur and muscle, shaving bone. He hadn't overpowered the monster. He'd made it injure itself. A chill ran through the attendants. In their minds, metal whispered on bone. "Boss bought me this mithril wire," Leguna said, forcing a grin. "And this ground drake glove. 40 gold total. He really does look after me. Just check my gear." He kept talking to hide the wave in his gut. He'd killed beasts in Nightsong Forest, and even a few orcs, but this was the bloodiest end he'd seen. The slurry of red and torn meat made his stomach roll. He clenched his jaw, determined not to retch, unaware that everyone now saw a ruthless tactician where a moment ago stood a boy trying not to be sick. "All right, how are we splitting this?" Leguna asked once he'd gathered his gear. The last few days had taught him one thing. Fiend corpses were worth a small fortune, especially great snow fiends. How they divided the haul mattered. "There are two of them," Davor said. "We take the larger, you take the smaller." "Fair." It was. Without Leguna and Latte softening both beasts, Davor's party wouldn't have wrapped it up so cleanly. Two people or not, they'd earned half. Truth be told, if Davor hadn't seen their strength up close, he might have tried to kill them and take everything. But Latte had stood up from a direct hit without a bruise, and the boy had carved a monster apart with wire and nerve. Davor reassessed. Even drained, Leguna was dangerous. And Latte, if a great snow fiend couldn't rattle her, picking a fight with her was suicide. "Fine by me," Leguna said, nodding. "Didn't know you had a fair bone in you." He'd already forgotten the disintegration spell aimed at him minutes earlier. Latte hadn't. She'd gone back to her usual cool quiet. The profit from Kurdak's bets had already multiplied her purse. "We should talk," Davor said, stepping past his men toward the sweat-soaked youth bent over the carcass. "Oh, about what?" Leguna asked, swallowing back another wave of nausea as he worked the hide. Latte surprised him by helping. "Your abilities," Davor said simply. "There were only two of you, yet you earn my respect. That's the foundation for working together." "What else?" Leguna didn't look up, sawing through the thick fur. "Why are you here?" He'd guessed someone like Latte didn't need what he was after. "Maybe start with yourself before prying," Leguna muttered. Davor hesitated, then decided to lay cards on the table. "There's a crystalback snow lizard deeper in these caverns. I want its fiend core. It's above our weight class. I'm asking for your help." "Crystalback what?" Leguna said. "A rare, high-order fiend," Davor explained. "A trace of blue dragon blood. The whole body's valuable, but I need the core to push my ice aspect control." He glanced at Latte. "I've hit a wall. So that's your goal?" Latte said at last. "Yes. Your turn. With your talent, Miss Latte, you didn't come here for that. We're after a Millennium Snow Lotus," she said. "We don't need your lizard." "Good. No conflict." Davor smiled. "Help me take the crystal back. I'll help you search for the Snow Lotus. We split materials 50-50, except the core. That's mine. So we do the dangerous hunt, and you accompany us," Latte said, voice frosted. "You're not wrong," Davor said, unruffled. "But you came with two comrades, didn't you? They're not here. In these tunnels you can wander for days without a map. I have one." He tapped his temple. "Not perfect, but enough that we won't get lost. Help me get the core, and I'll help find your flower and your missing people." "A man who is running for his life claims to know the maze," Latte said. "I'm supposed to believe that." "Bad call under pressure, not ignorance," Davor said, wincing. Her silence stretched. He pressed on. "It's a fair deal. Don't tell me that isn't enough. You're not overreaching, are you?" She wanted to see his bottom line. Satisfied, she named hers. "One condition, we don't die for you. If it gets lethal, we leave." Davor clenched his teeth. "Deal. Do your best. Don't stake your lives." And Leguna gagged. Davor frowned. "What now? Next time, have your men do the butchering." I can't." Leguna bolted to a corner and retched. Latte said nothing, though a trace of wicked amusement tugged at her mouth. Davor suddenly wondered if he'd mispriced this partnership. Ugh. Even later, Leguna would stop mid-step and dry heave. The scene was burned into his head. Close his eyes, and the memory rushed up, dragging his lunch with it. "Annie, you're not disgusted?" he asked, uneasy. He'd always figured she was sheltered from gore. "I try not to look," she said, as if discussing the weather. "Miss Latte shouldn't have to," Davor added smoothly. "A sight that foul should never stain eyes that lovely. It would be sacrilege." "You flatter me," she replied, blank as marble. "I don't flatter. I tell the truth," Davor said with an easy smile. When he wasn't fighting, he was at her side, polite and persistent. Recruiting a genius like her would be a coup. Marrying one, even better. He thought he was making progress. She didn't sneer, at least. Leguna knew better. Analot's face rarely moved. He alone could ruffle her, and he wore that knowledge like a badge. Time had no meaning underground. Under Davor's lead they walked and walked, patience thinning, until the tunnel opened and the crystalback snow lizard finally came into view.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Are you sure? That's a lizard? Stammered Leguna as he looked at the gigantic thing not far away. Even though the passage of time was hard to notice in the caverns, based on the times they dined, they had been traveling for approximately a day. Now, Davor had finally brought them to the nest of the crystalback snow lizard. These past few days of adventures had made Leguna marvel at the mystery and vastness of the world. He had originally thought caves were just small holes used for shelter from the rain and wind that might have a couple of beasts within. However, this trip had greatly expanded his horizons. He didn't think caves could actually have such complicated structures. Within were beasts and fiends all over. It could be said that the caves had their own ecosystem not inferior to the forest one bit. Currently, he had encountered the cavern's apex predator, one which ruled the food chain. Their target, the crystalback snow lizard. But when he finally saw how the lizard looked, he couldn't help but gasp, involuntarily taking in a breath of cold air. That's a lizard? That's a freaking lizard. Has anyone ever seen a lizard more than a meter tall, or longer than 10? Has anyone ever seen a lizard that gives off an aura like that of a dragon? Has anyone ever seen a lizard whose breath forms crystals of ice? Never. Well, I finally have. We want to kill that. Ha! Ha! Ha ha ha! Oh, Davor, you're insane. If you really want to die that much, and Latte will do it for you if you just touch her, but why did you have to come all the way here and make trouble for this humongous lizard? Are you trying to warm up before dying? That's what you want. Why do you have to drag us into it? I still have a lot I want to see. I don't want to end up lizard droppings with you. Not knowing about Leguna's fervent internal cursing, Davor calmly nodded. Yes, this is the one. Don't try to look calm. Your voice is chattering. You're afraid of it too, right? Exclaimed Leguna, already at the point of jumping up and down repeatedly. Well, to be honest, I do feel a little afraid of something like that. But I wouldn't come unprepared, naturally, said Davor as he took out 2 violet-bluish spell scrolls from his dimensional pocket. What are those? Asked Latte, alert. She could smell the danger coming from the magical waves. These are scrolls of the level 7 spell, Death's Finger. Davor adopted the least threatening pose he could as he spoke. He had realized Analot's insecurity and tried his best to show that he had no hostile intentions. And Latte lightly nodded and became silent again. While Death's Finger was a level 7 spell, it was considered one of the spells with the greatest focused destructive potential outside of mythical spells. Given that Davor was a magus of the 12th stratum, he wasn't capable of making spell scrolls containing Death's Finger. He must have spent a huge amount of money on them at the inner circle of Eye of Arcana. It was apparent that Davor was dead set on obtaining that fiend core. Such a scary scroll must have cost thousands of gold. Is getting the core really worth it? Asked Leguna. He got to know from Wireless's notebook how precious level 7 spell scrolls were. He didn't think Davor would be such an extravagant person, given how he took out 2 scrolls so casually. Naturally, the crystalback snow lizard's core has always been priceless. 2 Death's Finger scrolls don't come anywhere close to matching it. Also, if I'm able to make my breakthrough using the fiend core, I'll be able to make these scrolls myself. I'd have no shortage of these then, replied Davor. He was right in that the worth of a strong magus was far beyond appraisal. Cougar, I'll count on you guys. You are all family elites. I promise you the family will greatly reward you if we succeed. Even if any of you die, the family will take care of your family until your next generation grows up, said Davor solemnly. Young master, what are you saying? We used to be criminals. What kind of future awaited slaves like us if not for the master? The family gave us clothes, food, and dignity, all things a human ought to have. Now it's our turn to repay our debts to the family. Cugger smiled relaxedly, as if he was really going to face just a lizard. So they were originally slaves as well, thought Leguna with a start. Those attendants were probably brought over as slaves when they were teenagers and purchased by Daver's father when he noticed their affinity for impetus. Leguna, who'd had a similar experience, changed his opinion of the attendants quite substantially. Before, he felt they were merely Daver's goons at his beck and call. He didn't think they had their own share of hardships. He finally realized most people could only see what was on the surface and make attributions to them, thinking they understood the people they were judging well. But in reality, how much did they really know about them? 1. Daver didn't linger on the sentimentality. He nodded solemnly before he announced the battle plan. The original plan was really crude and simple. Cugger and the other 3 warriors would first hold the crystalback snow lizard back while he waited for the perfect opportunity to deal the killing blow by unleashing the 2 death's finger spells contained in the scrolls. Now that Enlate and Leguna had joined their group, though, he had to make some adjustments to certain parts of the plan. Most centered around Enlate. Daver handed her one of the death's finger scrolls, mainly because level 7 spells were beyond his abilities in the first place. Even using the scrolls themselves came with great risks. If he lost control of his magic, it could cause an energy explosion. In the best case, he would be heavily injured. In the worst, he would suffer magic blowback and his stratum would fall. There was also a chance he could die. It was already that dangerous to use one of the scrolls, not to speak of using 2. So, he decided to trust Enlate and hand her one. Even though Analod's magic stratum was 1 lower than his, he believed controlling the magic of a level 7 spell scroll wasn't a big deal for Enlate. Enlate herself didn't have any objections to the arrangement. She accepted the scroll and replied, "Got it," coldly. Leguna, who wasn't the least bit informed about magic, didn't know about the risks involved. Otherwise, he definitely would have tried to think of a way to convince Enlate against accepting the scroll, even if he knew she wouldn't necessarily listen to him. "All right, let's begin. The beast is getting rather impatient as well," said Daver as he began to dictate enhancement spells on all of them. He wasn't wrong. The crystalback snow lizard had already discovered their presence. However, it didn't rush over roaring like the great snow fiends had. Instead, it was checking them out as a predator would its prey. Fiends that made it to the crystalback snow lizard's level would have a certain level of intelligence. It was their most threatening trait. Under Daver's instructions, Cugger and the other attendants rushed forward without any hesitation. Holding shields in their left hands and one-handed axes in their right, they incited their impetus to the highest state they could. Given how ridiculously tough a fiend of that size was, they knew they couldn't count on slowly grinding it down. The only chance they had was to wait for Daver and Enlate to unleash their terrifying spells and slay it. That was why the time the battle would last wasn't long. With their impetus at full force, they would either gift the gigantic lizard a swift death or run out of impetus and end up lizard droppings. Daver and Enlate followed behind closely. Only Leguna seemed a little hesitant. The humongous lizard made his stomach churn sickly. But when he saw Enlate had already gone forward, he felt blood rush to his head. Gritting his teeth, he held his long sword ready and joined the battle. He didn't dare to use Flame Blade as its reach was far too short. Down there, its back is its natural armor. The parts near its belly and throat are weaker. Try to get it to stand upright. "My attacks will only effective then," shouted Daver in between his dictations. "You make it sound easy. How do we get it upright?" "Do we hold it up?" mumbled Leguna. His attention was diverted slightly when he spoke, and the long tail of the crystalback snow lizard cracked against his back like a whip. It sent him flying into a corner. When he landed, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Given that his constitution wasn't as strong as the attendants and his non-defensive oriented gear, the strike felt like a basin-sized hammer smashing against his back. All the air in his lungs was expelled, but as it had been just a passing, it didn't contain much force. His innards were only slightly injured. At the very least, his bones weren't fractured. Even so, the strike put him out of commission for a few moments. When he came to again, he realized the long sword in his hand had been ruined. Its blade was chipped so badly it looked like a saw. What kind of junk is this? It's supposed to be made of mithril. Muller, that sneaky, dwarven merchant, cursed Leguna as he flung the long sword to the ground. Actually, it wasn't that Muller's products were of bad quality. Instead, Leguna's attack had landed on the snow lizard's back, the fiend's toughest part. The sword getting chipped was the only reasonable outcome. Leguna looked around and noticed a skeleton not far away. Beside it lay a gleaming long sword. It must have been an adventurer once. Leguna wasn't bothered by the corpse and ran forward to take the sword. It was a one-handed long sword of elegant design. The sword was 4 centimeters broad and a little longer than a meter. Apart from a bloodletting fuller, there were also some very intricate engravings that seemed to serve only as decorations. The top of the hilt was encrusted with a large, but dull-looking, rock of unknown material. Leguna held the weapon only to find it was really easy to wield and also had a really suitable weight. Young Master, as the strongest of the attendants, Cugger took the helm when it came to fighting the lizard. Currently, he had suffered heavy injuries from the frost breath of the crystal-backed snow lizard, as was apparent from the ice crystals all over his face and hair. He looked just like a pathetic and laughable snowman. However, Leguna found that he wasn't able to laugh in the slightest. The meat shield knew there was little chance he would last much longer, so he discarded his shield and used all his remaining energy to raise the lizard to expose its weakness. Now that Cugger was unprotected, he became the fiend's main target. It rained consecutive blows on Cugger with its tail, yet the man merely grit his teeth without budging in the slightest. But if anyone was close enough, they would see the blood leaking out of the corners of Cugger's mouth. One editor's note: this is an actual neural bias called the fundamental attribution error, where people think that others' behavior reflects their character, and their own behavior is because of outside causes. See Wikipedia, opens a new tab for more info. Darn it, Daver tore his death finger scroll with bloodshot eyes and supplied his magic with all he got. He let it flow according to the guidance circuit in the scrolls. The sudden loss of magic made him feel a little weak, almost to the point of fainting. But he endured. Otherwise, Cugger's death would have been in vain. And Latte also rolled open her scroll quietly. But, unlike Daver, its activation didn't seem to affect her much. Nothing about her changed apart from the slight paling of her face. A beam of crimson light emitted from their fingers simultaneously. It was a blast of pure energy, but due to their immense purity and density, the wave seemed to give others the impression that space itself was being bent. Daver's death's fingers struck the crystalback snow lizard first. A terrifying wound formed around the huge monstrosity's throat. The attack almost tore through its neck completely. However, even though its soft weak point was greatly damaged, it wasn't nearly a fatal strike. But in the next moment, Analot's death's finger struck it with even greater force. Unlike Daver, Anlate didn't aim her attack near its belly. Instead, she chose to fire at the head directly. She had grasped the opportunity when the fiend let out a cry of pain to send the beam straight into its mouth. While her attack didn't leave an obvious wound, everyone knew she was the one who had dealt the blow. The lizard began to struggle with all its might. Cugger, holding it up for below, could no longer hold on and fell over. The fiend's huge body rolled all over Cugger's remains, squashing them until they were almost unrecognizable. Seeing the lizard wriggle around like a severed earthworm, the other attendants jumped away urgently. Their mission was complete, and what they had to do now was get away while the fiend was giving its final struggle before its death, lest they were killed for no good reason. However, they underestimated the intelligence and vitality of this particular high-order fiend. Analot's attack did leave it with a fatal wound, but it didn't kill it outright. It was still capable of launching attacks. It flailed about for 2 reasons: coping with the immense pain and putting up a show. It wanted to fake a death struggle to shrug away the annoying attendants so it could drag its killer, that blue-haired maiden, down with it. All of a sudden, the lizard stopped wriggling and took position to dash. In an instant, it unleashed all its energy and rushed up to Enlate before anyone could react. Faced with the sudden appearance of the gigantic creature, Analot's expression didn't change. It was as if she'd predicted it wouldn't be taken down so easily. The crystal-backed snow lizard twisted its body with breakneck speed, sending its tail that was a few meters long swooshing towards Enlate. The girl hurriedly dictated a flight spell and narrowly avoided the life-threatening blow. However, flight spells were not known for their flexibility, and there was only limited space in the caverns. Enlate didn't dare to rely on the flight spell to dodge around. Instead, she canceled the spell's effects right after evading and did a backflip while sending a fireball in the snow lizard's way. While she was most proficient in ice aspect spells, the fiends that resided at Ice Peak Mountain weather incredibly cold temperatures on a daily basis, allowing them to have very high frost resistance. That was the reason she could only rely on fire aspect spells to conduct combat, resulting in her being unable to unleash her full abilities. While the fireball struck the crystal-backed snow lizard, it didn't seem to cause it much harm. It waved its tail around to force Daver and the other attendants back before rushing towards Enlate once more. Soon, the girl found herself forced into a corner. Nevertheless, she didn't panic. The fiend's movements had noticeably slowed, and it didn't seem like it would last much longer. Without a trace of urgency, Enlate dictated a few defensive enhancement spells and intended to endure the death blows of the crystal-backed snow lizard. The beast opened its mouth for a bite, but Enlate used a transference spell and blinked to the flank of the fiend. The cunning beast seemed to notice Analot's position and swung its tail once more, knocking her straight into a wall. Then, the crystal-backed snow lizard breathed in deeply to prepare for its final frost breath. Enlate was already slumped in the corner of the wall weakly. Even though she managed to dictate a stone-skin spell on herself, the strike from the crystal-backed snow lizard was far stronger than that of the great snow fiend. The girl who had easily dealt with the challenging battles along the way still got injured in the end. Enlate looked coldly at the crystal-backed snow lizard, not fearing the upcoming frost breath even one bit. But at that moment, a look of panic flashed past her eyes. Leguna's figure had appeared in front of her all of a sudden. Even though he didn't say anything, Enlate could tell that it took all of his courage and determination to stand before her like that. That instant, the back seemed immeasurably stable like a mountain in the girl's eyes. Perhaps he had been affected by the courage shown by Cugger before his death. Leguna felt blood rush to his head when he saw Enlate gradually forced into a tough spot. He raised his new weapon and rushed over without caring about anything else. All he wanted to do was protect her. He didn't consider for a single moment whether his slight frame could fill the space between the lizard's teeth. When he faced it, he showed not a shred of cowardice nor of fear. He gathered all the impetus he could as he awaited the frost breath of the fiend. Soon, the long sword began to grow, slightly thanks to the impetus infused within it. Then, he flung the long sword forward. The long sword left his hand and flew straight into the beast's mouth. At that moment, the fiend finished its build-up and sent a cold breath of air of negative 150 centigrade straight for him. All he could feel was his lungs freezing up into millennium ice crystals. He didn't think being exposed to extreme cold would hurt far more than being set on fire. His face lost all feeling as the blood within his body froze up within an instant. After that, he felt a strike on his chest and flew backwards, smashing straight into Analot's body. It was the lizard's final strike. Within its body, the long sword Leguna had tossed had already pierced into its heart. The engravings on the hilt of the sword glowed faintly as it frenziedly devoured the last remaining life force. Soon, the terrifying fiend lost all vitality. The colorless rock on the hilt of the longsword also looked more completely than before. It even had a slight sheen to it. Leguna wore a dazed expression. The low temperature caused his blood to coagulate and flow incredibly slowly, hampering his thoughts considerably. Analot's face appeared in his vision, looking as cold and expressionless as usual. However, Her eyes carried a look of confusion, like it was asking why Leguna had done what he had. I don't have many friends, you see. He coughed with considerable difficulty. Boss, sis, and you. So, I don't want to lose any of you. You are all I have, and I don't want to lose anything anymore. I can't afford to. You? Aren't you afraid of dying? Asked the girl softly. Leguna cracked an ugly smile. Of course, I do. But some things are even more terrifying than death. And you've saved me 3 times already. As he spoke, his consciousness gradually blurred. At the last moment, he seemed to see the corner of Annalot's lips curve upwards. She actually smiled. As expected, you look best when you smile, was his last thought before he faded away completely. Annalot's fair, small hand touched his head softly. She knew the wound on his chest wasn't the worst of his injuries. The worst lay in his super low body temperature from taking the frost breath head on. With a will from her, the frost elements in his body flowed away obediently into hers. The moment the frost elements left him, he began to look much better. He would be fine after his injuries were wrapped and taken care of. Friends, huh? Thought she. She wasn't sure whether she had just made her first friend. Thank you for your help. Consider this special healing potion an extra token of gratitude. I hope Leguna will be fine. Daver approached Anne Latte from behind before anyone noticed. She received the healing potion and nodded without saying much else. I wonder how Boss and Sis are doing now, said Leguna as he walked with the aid of a beaten-up wooden stick. Had it not been for Daver's special healing potion, he might even find it hard to crawl. You've been separated for 3 or 4 days already, right? Asked Daver. Since the two had helped him deal with the crystalback snow lizard, he intended to keep his end of the deal and help them look for the Millennium Snow Lotus and their 2 companions. Probably. We can't see the sun here, so I'm not really sure either, answered Leguna. Enlatte had a bad feeling. Something bad must have befallen her other party members. However, she did not express any of it. She was rather confident in Kurdak's abilities. Though, it didn't stop her from guessing what could have happened to the other 2. At that moment, a subtle wave of energy flowed into her consciousness. Enlatte stopped in her tracks and said to the rest, I think I know where they are. Vera looked at the twilight scenery of the snowy mountain outside the cavern. It somehow brought with it a feeling of boundless majesty. How are your injuries? I was lucky this afternoon and managed to catch something again, said Kurdak as he waved the snow rabbit in his hand around. I'm fine, more or less. I can move somewhat now, answered Vera, smiling. Her face had a tinge of red now. It had now been 3 days since they jumped off the cliff. Over the past 3 days, thanks to the extensive care Kurdak gave her, her injuries had recovered really quickly. Most of her wounds had scabbed, and it seemed she would completely recover in a few more days. We really did it, thought Vera when she reflected on how hopeless she had been just a few days earlier. Being badly injured and lost in the mountains, a harsh environment with chilling temperatures, she felt there was no way she would ever leave. It was true, she despaired immensely in the beginning, but Kurdak hadn't. The crude and rough-looking man had taken care of her patiently the entire time. He hunted, cleaned her wounds, and racked his brains for ways to give her hope every day. Now, something not short of a miracle had happened. Even though Leguna and Anlate hadn't been able to find them, Vera's injuries had mostly recovered. It seemed she would soon be able to think of a way to leave. When Kurdak had asked her to trust him, she'd promised to. He hadn't let her down. They managed to weather the worst. Here, you should be fine after having another potion. Kurdak took a bottle out of his vest and handed it to her. He looked slightly pale, and the hands that held the potion shuddered ever so slightly. He looks incredibly tired, thought Vera as she looked at the fatigue on his face. He tried, and failed, to hide. She accepted the potion. Why'd you have so many potions? Instead of buying so many, you could have bought a few more real elementary potions. Well, it was cheap, and I couldn't resist. I got these for just 50 silver on the black market. Real elementary potions cost 10 gold apiece. I thought it couldn't hurt to buy a few more, just in case. I'd forgotten about them entirely until 2 days ago. I didn't think they'd be this effective. Kurdak smiled as he sat down on a rock next to her. But they taste horrible. They're raw and salty. Nothing like the sweet and sour taste of the real things, said Vera, furrow-browed. The bootlegs Kurdak had given her not only tasted incredibly bad, they weren't very effective either. It was no wonder they were 50 silver. Even so, taking them would save her life, so she downed them despite her complaints. It's already a wonder they work. Stop being so picky, countered Kurdak as he put the empty bottles away and leaned against a wall. He let out a long sigh. Vera looked at the exhausted man and felt a little guilty. She shifted and cuddled against his chest like a kitten. Kurdak, what? Thanks for the last couple of days, muttered she, head buried in his chest. Sheesh, where'd that come from? I'm your party leader, and you're my woman. I have to protect you, probed he, smiling. This was the first time he'd stated their relationship directly. He didn't know whether she would accept him or not. TCH, who's your woman? Vera clicked her tongue. She felt her cheeks heat up ever so slightly. Kurdak's joy soared when he heard her not-so-serious rebuke. He decided to strike while the iron was still hot. It's only a matter of time. Don't even think of running away. Vera could feel how hard his heart was beating and realized that even the crudest men could have moments when they felt anxious. As she listened quietly, her experiences over the last couple of months flashed through her mind. Kurdak, Leguna, and Latte, Cyranos, Eve. Thinking about Leguna, guessed Kurdak when she stopped talking all of a sudden. Vera nodded lightly. Yeah, I wonder how Lay is doing. We haven't seen him for 3 days. I worry he will run into a great snow fiend. Kurdak patted her head gently. Don't worry, Lay will be fine. Don't forget he single-handedly finished off a few orcs. While he normally acts like a coward, he's actually quite reliable when it counts. Also, Latte should be with him. Leguna will be fine if she's with him. Vera looked oddly at him. You're usually pretty reserved when it comes to Latte. Why are you suddenly so confident in her? I'm reserved because I'm confident in her, said Kurdak helplessly. What do you mean? Whatever. There's no harm in telling you. Just don't tell Lay, Kurdak said after a pause. Actually, Latte is a member of Moonshadow. My best guess is she should be a high ranker. What? Even though Vera was surprised at first, it made complete sense when she thought about it. Remember how I was able to defeat Orwin? She'd given me a lot of information on him before the duel. I'd spent most of my time studying it in the 2 days before the duel, explained Kurdak. So that why, mumbled Vera, nodding, since she's helped you, why are you still so reserved? She's acting in Moonshadow's interests. Orwin was troublesome for the guild, and they wanted to eliminate him. They just borrowed my hands for it. I just happened to be involved, so they dealt with Orwin through me. They were the ones who got off cheap, said Kurdak with a cold smile. His remarks weren't far from the truth. Before the duel, Latte had bet 10,000 gold coins in the underground casinos on his victory. She managed to force a payout of 6-1 to drop to 5-1 with her bet alone. Even though Kurdak thought he'd struck gold with his bet, she was the biggest winner. The poor man who thought he'd made a killing would never know how Latte was secretly smiling at him coldly. That's not the main reason, though. This is only a feeling, but I think the orcs' attack in Nightsong Forest had something to do with her, or with Moonshadow, at least. I've always thought Cyranos' death had something to do with her. Maybe she knows something. Cyranos. When she heard his name, Vera's heart pained. The quiet yet incredibly attentive man had left them for good. It's been more than 2 months, right? Sighed Vera. Yeah, 2 months, mumbled Kurdak, before his expression distorted badly. Darn it, it's been 2 months. Kurdak hurriedly pushed Vera aside and stood up in a hurry. Initially shocked, Vera soon realized why he'd shoved her away. Today was the next full moon. Freaking hell. No wonder something felt off tonight, thought Kurdak. After a quick thought, he decided they had no choice but to part temporarily since they didn't have any rope to tie him up. He quickly approached Vera, stroked her slightly terrified face, and said, Don't worry, there's still time. I'll leave right away. Stay here for the night. I'll go as far as I can and come back tomorrow. If I don't get back by noon, start a fire, make it smoke as much as you can, and I'll come. Here's the fire starter. Vera took it. What if I left instead? You've been taxing yourself too much lately. I am well rested. I can find my way back just fine. No, you're still injured. You shouldn't go about in the wilderness. No more buts. Though she wanted to say something else, Kurdak's mind was already made up. She opened her mouth slightly, but couldn't say anything in the end. Having made his preparations, he hugged her. "Don't worry, it'll be fine after tonight," consoled he as he left. "Be careful. I'll be waiting," whispered Vera. "I'll be back, don't worry. I'm a man of my word." Kurdak gave her a last look, smiled, and left. Vera noticed he was on the brink of losing control. His footsteps were very rushed. Several dozen minutes later, the bone-chilling howl of a werewolf echoed up and down the mountain. Vera remained crouched in a corner of the cave and buried her head in her arms, feeling rather distraught. The howling rang out from time to time, and she tried her best to stay calm and focused on the thought that it would all be over by sunrise. But not long after, another low bellow could be heard from another direction. "Oh, gra!" The cries of the two fiends got louder and louder. It sounded like they were getting closer and closer to one another. Kurdak! Kurdak! She could no longer keep her worry for him suppressed. She ran towards the howls as fast as her feet would carry her. The fiends' cries overlapped and became ever more deafening. The isolated injured whimper could be heard occasionally. It made her even more anxious. Faster, faster. The snow was approximately 1 foot deep. As her injuries had just recovered, it was incredibly difficult for her to run in the snow. Her wounds risked tearing open again if she was careless. But she didn't care about it at that moment. The two fiends' roars were getting fainter by the second. It sounded like the battle was coming to an end. She ran faster the closer to thought she as. When she finally arrived, the sight that greeted her almost made her black out. It should be noted that Kurdak never would have expected to see Leguna's sneaky-looking face wear such an ecstatic expression. He looked to be in pure bliss. Even with Daver leading the way and the contact crystal marking their location, they'd spent a whole day before they could finally find Kurdak's hideout. Over the course of that day, Vera's wound had reopened and Kurdak had been in a very weak state. Their mobility had taken a huge blow. Even though their lives weren't in any danger in the short term, there was no way they could make it out of Icepeak Mountain on their own. That was why, when Kurdak saw the little rascal, he acted like a wolf that had just caught sight of a beauty and leaped straight forward to give the youth a big bear hug. "Boss, did you miss me that much?" Though Leguna struggled to breath, he didn't resist. Actually, he was also rather moved to see the big lunk. Over the last couple of days, he and Anlate had to face off against fiends and Daver. At first, given that he didn't have much experience adventuring, and the fact that he had to pay attention to Daver's group, lest they changed their minds about the truce, he'd felt a lot of pressure. Now that he had finally found Kurdak, he felt like he'd gotten his bearings again. That was why the man's face looked all the more welcome to him. But after paying his attention to the two's living conditions, he started to question his boss' reliability. Even though Kurdak had confidently expressed that as long as I have something to eat, you will have a share of it, the problem now was that Kurdak himself only had leftover scraps. Leguna wouldn't get anything even if he licked the plate clean. "Well, one way or another, you're still my subordinate. I was really worried about you as your boss, you know. I was terrified you'd turn into fiend food sooner or later," said Kurdak with a leave it to me now I'll come out of the time expression. "But you've had it quite rough yourself, boss," countered Leguna, attempting to remind Kurdak who the rescuer was. "You're still bringing this up? If not for the fact that we left most of our belongings with Anlate, would we have fallen to such straits?" Kurdak barked. "Miss Anlate, I wonder how much one of those dimensional pockets costs. I'll need one in the future, too. The feeling of having nothing to eat or use is very frustrating." "For 1,000 gold," said Anlate with a hint of surprise. Vera had just given her a big hug, disorienting a girl who usually didn't experience so much skinship. Fortunately, the one who'd hugged her was Vera. Had it been the grimy-faced Leguna or the sweaty Kurdak, she would have flung a fireball at them already. Our first mission is complete. Seeing that the five were busy with their reunion and ignoring him thoroughly, he had no choice but to interrupt. Kurdak finally noticed Daver's presence and looked at him carefully. The last interaction he'd had with the man had been rather distasteful. "Oh, I should reintroduce them. This here is Mr. Daver, 12th strata magus. We managed to get here so quickly thanks to him guiding us. Mr. Daver, this here is our party's leader, Kurdak, the Iron Blood Greetbeer. He's a 9th stratum warrior. Leguna tried his best to soften the tense atmosphere. He'd come to realize Daver was a pretty decent person over the last couple of days. Apart from his strong lust and arrogance, there wasn't much to hate about him. However, every time he saw Daver orbit and latte like an annoying fly, he felt the urge to sink his dagger into his back. To make his boss seem more impressive, Leguna even picked a domineering-sounding nickname for him of his own accord. He nodded, satisfied, as if his initiative was worthy of praise. "You're the stupid bear. Your whole family are bears," thought Kurdak as his veins popped. He wanted to give Leguna a stomp, but given the others present, he had no choice but to go with his introduction. He stretched out his hand. Kurdak. The two shook hands. After seeing how scary Leguna and Enlate were, Daver had decided he couldn't afford to offend these people, so his attitude was far warmer than before. "I'm Daver. Mr. Kurdak, I've also heard of your reputation. Iron Blood Greetbeer. Seeing you in person just reaffirms the things I heard about you." "Ha, I don't really have that kind of reputation." While Kurdak sounded cheery, he decided solemnly that he'd give Laguna's cheeks both a stomp. The group spent most of their time over the next several days looking for Millennium Snow Lotus. With Daver was leading the way, their search went much faster than expected, especially with the help of the map. "Come to think of it, why are you looking for Millennium Snow Lotus?" asked Daver. Though he didn't stop his bad habit of annoying the two beautiful dames, his advances toned down considerably given Leguna and Kurdak's occasional displeased glares. They managed to get to know each other better, and was at the point of chatting and laughing together as they traveled. "One of my good friends got an odd disease and requires Millennium Snow Lotus to survive," offered Kurdak simply. He didn't dare reveal the truth about the werewolf in him. "I see," nodded Daver. They wouldn't go out of their way and expose themselves to this kind of risk if it's just about selling these for money. After checking the direction, he directed, "According to your map, the next area to look at is not far ahead." "Daver, why are you so familiar with Ice Peak Mountain?" asked Vera. "The frost all over the mountain is incredibly helpful to my training in frost aspect magic. I come here often to strengthen myself. I've got to know the mountain better than most over the years." "You don't look like the hard-working type," doubted Vera. In her eyes, young masters were mostly spoiled brats, just like Jord, the son of Starfall's mayor. She didn't think Daver would be so different. "For the family and for myself, working hard is necessary," smiled Daver. Vera simply nodded. Though Daver had offended her in the past, given his looks were passable and he'd kept his word to help them look for Millennium Snow Lotus, she decided to let the old matter slide. As they chatted and walked, they soon arrived at the spot marked by the map. "Let's split up here and search independently. Make sure to notify the rest if you find anything." Daver might have joined their party temporarily, but Kurdak was still the one in charge. The others nodded and went their own way. Ice Peak Mountain looked like nothing but fields of white. Finding Millennium Snow Lotus, which was also snow white, was quite troublesome. Leguna searched with all his attention as Kurdak's life depended on this. He'd always felt very guilty since the incident in the forest. He kept thinking that if he had been brave enough to look for Vera along with him, he wouldn't have ended up as he had. He'd been doing his best to find ways to make it up to him. Focusing all his attention on his search, he didn't miss any detail. But it was precisely this deep level of concentration that made him neglect the odd movements of a patch of snow behind him. The flower in front of him radiated beautifully. Its emerald green leaves surrounded the faint white lotus petals that carried with them a hint of green. The petals layered onto each other and curled tightly towards the center. Though it had been sitting on the ground's surface, weathering the elements, it still looked pure and untainted. Leguna jumped excitedly and called out, "I found it!" The moment he lowered his guard, the white figure in the snow leaped forward and approached him at a speed to which normal people couldn't react. Leguna trembled all of a sudden, feeling the cold, killing intent coming from behind him. It almost felt like there was a snickering death god licking his back with its long, thin tongue. A feeling of impending doom suddenly clouded his mind. He cried out loudly under the intense pressure and subconsciously drew his dagger to block the blow. A lightless dagger easily changed its trajectory to avoid Flame Blade and pierced in his chest almost effortlessly before it was drawn back just as quickly. Fresh blood spurted out as the dagger left his body. It dropped to the bleach-white snow, creating a crimson, lightless void as it melted the snow it touched and soaked further in. Everything happened far too quickly. Leguna didn't even get a glance at his attacker. He just heard a faint, playful whisper. "I got sick of trailing you, so I came to say hi. Don't die on me, just yet though." He finally noticed the wound on his chest. He tried to open his mouth, but collapsed before he could say anything. "You found the Snow Lotus? Where is it?" Vera was the first to make it to the scene after hearing him call out. But when she saw the collapsed youth, he hurriedly called out for the rest. A moment later, everyone gathered. "I still have a bottle of strong healing potion. Use it quick." Daver generously handed out a bottle of strong healing potion, easily worth 100 gold coins. "It's pointless. He's poisoned," interjected Latte after she felt the heat coming from Laguna's body. She pushed the panicking Vera away and began to inspect his injury. A moment later, she shuddered. "It was Bela," muttered she, shocked. "Oh," yelled Vera, and Latte didn't bother to respond to Vera. "I'm going to use the transference spell to bring him back for detoxification. I'll leave the rest to you. See you back at the inn in Snow Rock," said she to Kurdak. Kurdak knew time was of the essence and nodded obediently. "All right, we're counting on you." And Latte nodded, slung Leguna over her shoulder, and dictated the transference spell. Moments later, the two silhouettes appeared somewhere on Ice Peak Mountain. The transference spell could only work for a limited distance. Though Latte had already used it to its maximum capability, it was still far from enough. She had no choice but to repeat the process. The swift consumption of magical power made her feel dizzy. But she didn't dally and forcefully steeled herself to continue. "This is the mission the president gave me. I have to keep him safe," thought she. Deep down, in the dark corners of her mind, another, weak, faint, quiet voice screeched unbeknownst to her. "Don't die. Weren't you going to be my friend? Don't die. I don't have anyone else. I knew I'd been stabbed when I saw the damn knife sticking out of my chest." Leguna. Kurdak inspected the traces left on the scene. From it, he surmised that Leguna had probably been too excited at finding the Millennium Snow Lotus and had dropped his guard. He had been taken by surprise as a result. Despite that, he believed the attacker was an assassin whose abilities far exceeded their own. Impeccable stealth, terrifying patience, and an incredibly clear mind. The assailant was probably around the 14th stratum. It must be an assassin just below the high order. An enemy like this could wipe out the whole party if he were prepared. Fortunately, the assailant was only interested in Leguna, and it seemed he had dealt a non-fatal blow on purpose. "Looks like Lay is being dragged down into the murky waters of Moonshadow's dealings," Kurdak thought, worried. At present, he wasn't too worried about Laguna's survival. He trusted in Latte as much as she trusted him. The girl wouldn't let such an important target die so easily. However, he was still worried that the kid would end up in countless complicated and intricate conflicts because of this. If this came to pass, not only would he have an even harder time getting out of the mess, he might even drag his two companions along. But no matter what, he wouldn't leave Leguna to himself. He had decided to deal with it all by the U side regardless of what would happen. "Kurdak, they'll be fine, right?" asked Vera anxiously. Even though the kid had only received a single wound, his chest was pierced through and it seemed rather serious. And Latte had also brought up the fact that he had been poisoned. "Don't worry, it'll be fine." "Didn't Latte take him back?" asked he with a smile. He looked at the Millennium Snow Lotus not far away. "Now we've found this, we ought to head back. We'll know how he's doing once we get back." "I take it my mission is over, then," commented Daver as he walked over. "Yes, Mr. Daver. We're heading back and regrouping with the two." "What about you?" asked Kurdak. "I should be heading back as well. Let's go together. You should save some time with me guiding you." Daver was actually getting a little impatient himself. He wanted to absorb his newly acquired fiend core as soon as possible. "Many thanks. I'll remember this favor. Enlate held Leguna, slung over her shoulder, tightly. The poison had knocked him out. He was as soft as a noodle. It was fortunate he didn't have a well-set build. In fact, he was even slightly shorter than Enlate, only 1.6 meters tall. She didn't feel too worn out from hauling him around, but it was also due in part to the fact that she had physical capabilities far in excess of normal magi. There were still several dozen kilometers between her and Snow Rock, but she was running out of magic. Her face was paper pale. Even though she was out in the freezing cold, drops of sweat gathered on her refined nose. The girl looked at Leguna, whose face was gradually turning red. He didn't have much time left. If she didn't detoxify him first, things would end very, very badly. She grit her teeth, and the seemingly cold and frail girl actually lifted Leguna into a piggyback position. The temperature of his body felt like a fireball against her back. Just as she was about to start running again, a person appeared in front of her. Old Geezer didn't seem quite appropriate a descriptor for him. The man with a full head of silver hair and some faint wrinkles on his forehead was actually of relatively old age. However, he looked vigorous. He sported a neat mustache and a defined figure. Clad in a noble black robe of masterful tailoring, he gave off the aura of a mature and elegant noble from a well-established house. And Latte didn't think of him like that at all, because he was looking at her with an odd squint, one with which stared at beauties. She gave him a single, fleeting glance before preparing to set out once more. She couldn't be bothered to waste her time on him. However, the other party was intent on stopping her. He appeared in front of her before she could react. "Can you please step aside? I'm in a rush here, cause I need to save my friend," said she coldly, her hesitance quite pronounced at the end of her sentence. "Oh, well, I certainly cannot stand by the wayside when I see such a beautiful girl running about helplessly. Why don't you let me help?" said the old ruffian warmly. "I don't need it. I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd step aside." Annalot's voice froze over. She didn't want to waste her precious time dallying anymore. "Don't be in such a hurry to refuse. I really can help you too," countered the old man as he stretched out his hand. A glint flashed in Annalot's eyes that moment. She realized there was no way she could leave without giving the old guy a lesson. Fortunately, she didn't feel an ounce of power radiating from him. She could deal with him quickly and be on her way in no time. But the moment his hand touched her, an undetectable wave of wind appeared between the two. The man jerked his hand back immediately and jumped backwards. He looked around alertly, but he wasn't able to see anything at all. Another wave appeared. This time, it was heading for the old man's hip. Clang! Metal clashed with metal, or so it sounded. A turquoise longsword was held in the old man's hands before anyone realized. Its design was minimalist and natural. It matched its wielder's decent looks. It had been meant to block the odd blow coming its wielder's way. The air shook yet again. This time, two waves headed for his throat and chest. He waved his hand and blocked the strikes again at a speed which Enlate couldn't see. "Come out. You've messed around enough," spat the man. Nothing. Not a sound. The only reply came in the form of 4 waves, all of which the man blocked again. "Hey, this isn't funny. Come out now," yelled he, waving his sword about. The response he got was the same, more waves. There were 8 of them this time, though. He again waved his sword to block them, but one near his head got through his defenses and cut off 2 strands of his silver hair. "Damn it, wireless! If you keep messing with me, I'll go uproot your headquarters. Want to bet? Do you know how hard it was for me to get my hair done right? I had the hairdresser in the Hawk's Palace take a whole month to design this hairstyle for me. What am I going to do with the 2 strands you cut off?" cried the old ruffian without a care for his reputation. "Oh, it's quite rare to see you throw a tantrum, Marilyn. Kevin wrote me a letter about how you messed with him quite thoroughly over years," said an elegant and deep voice. Immediately after, Wireless's figure gradually appeared next to Enlate. Upon seeing the president arrive, she sighed and blacked out. Using the transference spell 5 times in a row had drained her dry. The only reason she managed to hold on was her will. With Wireless's appearance, her mission was complete, so she fainted the moment she relaxed. Annie, what's going on?" cried Marilyn. no longer looking crude and perverted. Instead, he wore an expression of intense worry and anxiety he didn't bother to hide. "Hey, don't approach my subordinate lightly," said Wireless as he stepped forward. "Back off." Marillet's gaze was incredibly savage, like that of an agitated great dragon. "I don't want to hear you calling her that in the future. My daughter is nobody's subordinate, not even yours, Wireless. Let me warn you now. If you have in latte do anything unpleasant in the future, I'll dismantle your guild and deal with you later. You of all people should know I'm perfectly capable." The person in charge of Moonshadow, one of Lance's 4 factions, didn't look the least bit enraged after hearing these words. He just shrugged. "I was just joking around. You're as irritable as always." Aware of how he lost his cool, Marillet took a deep breath. "Never joke about this, my friend. You can joke with me about anything else, but not my daughter. I'm incredibly thankful you helped raise her, but it's best you don't agitate me." "No worries. I understand you more than you think," smiled Wireless. "Is Annie fine?" asked Marillet as he looked at his daughter, collapsed on the ground. "She's fine. She just passed out from fatigue. She used too much magical power," answered Wireless as he handed Marillet a bottle of potion. It was a solution made by Eye of Arcana to put a person to sleep for a short while and recover large amounts of magical power while they slept. Marillet knew it well and poured it into Annalot's mouth carefully. But looking at her pale face made the old, yet handsome, face crease with regret and pity. After he finished feeding her the potion, he stood up and waved his hand to stimulate his powerful impetus from the depths of his body. He then made the sleeping Anlate rise up gently in midair so her body wouldn't be in contact with the cold ground. "Your control over Wind's Palm has improved considerably. You looked incredibly relaxed, using Wave Blade 8 times in one go yourself. That aside, is this the kid I sent you a few months back?" asked Marillet as he kicked the unconscious Leguna. "Yes. Now you mention it, I think I owe you a word of thanks. This kid is rather intriguing." "Oh, he's poisoned?" "Haha, serves him right," said Marillet, with a tinge of schadenfreude. "I recall that apart from almost stealing something from you, he didn't do anything to offend you, right?" Wireless was quite taken aback. "He didn't offend me, but he sure did offend my precious daughter," Marillet said harshly. "Where do you think you come from, Brad? It's one thing if you try to pick up my girl, but now you had her pick you up and carry you over such a large distance until she fainted out of exhaustion. Yet, you're just lying there, unconscious and ignorant of everything happening around you. If this isn't dastardly, I don't know what is. Gah, just thinking about it makes me fume. I can't forgive you until I have you castrated. That's right. I'll see if you still dare to set your sights on my Annie then. It seems you made the right choice in not allowing me to tell her you're her real father. If Annie knew her father was actually such an unreliable and aloof person, she'd kill herself by banging her head against a wall." Wireless shrugged. "All right, leave the talking for later. Let's get them back to Snowrock." At Moonshadow's branch in Snowrock, Marillet carefully laid Anne Latte on a bed. He looked at the expression on the girl's face and sighed inaudibly. "It seems like you like that brat quite a lot, since you had Annie protect him," said he softly. "No, my friend, this isn't protection. All I had her do was adventure with him," Wireless countered, shaking his head. "Just like you said, spending too much time in this kind of environment is bad for her development. I had her interact with this silly brat, so he might inspire some change in her." "So you've chosen him as your successor?" asked Marillet. He picked up the documents on the table and read them casually. "Yes, he's actually rather decent. I'm very satisfied with his performance. What about Baylor? He will also have a chance, though I don't really favor him right now." "A coward like this actually caught your eye?" Marillet mused furrow-browed. "These reports paint him as a complete good-for-nothing. That isn't an obstacle for him to become strong. You know that well yourself. People can unleash terrifying power when they're utterly terrified. Leguna is such a person. There's a fire hidden in his heart, and what he fears is wind. If he is used inappropriately, the fire in him will be blown out. But if he is used properly, the wind will make fuel the fire, until it engulfs the world. All right, I don't care how you plan to blow this kid. But if Annie starts having any problems, I'll come for you," interrupted Marillet, glaring. Hey, I'm the one who raised Annie for the last 15 years. Do you think I don't give a single flying duck about her at all? Wireless said in an annoyed fashion with a wave of his hand. That aside, don't tell me you came all the way here on a vacation just to visit Annie. Of course, His Imperial Majesty requests your aid. Again, it seems the situation in the south of the Empire isn't looking good. Your help is crucial. The usual terms apply. Profit. If he can't offer anything that moves me, why should I bother sinking my feet in the mud? Replied Wireless expressionlessly. His Majesty said it could be discussed. Very well, I will visit Chino soon. What plans do you have? I'm already sick of that place. I plan to stay here for 2 years. I hope you can make the arrangements. Wireless gazed at his companion. Does this count as one of the favors His Majesty is offering? Well, you can say that. Since I'm here, I'll naturally help you deal with some things. After all, the sooner the situation stabilizes, the sooner you can focus on the East, Marilyn nodded. But don't expect me to answer your every beck and call. I will do what I please depending on my mood. Understood. Do you still want to meet Annie? Marilyn kept silent for a moment. Finally, he sighed. Forget it. Wireless patted the old man's shoulders but didn't say anything. Sir, when Anlate woke, Wireless was seated quietly beside her, apparently deep in thought. She immediately recognized her surroundings and knew he was in the guild's Snorrock branch. You're awake? Asked Wireless, smiling. Yes. Sir, Leguna. Anlate was rather worried about the youth's injuries since the one who'd hurt him was Baylor. He is stable for now. Is that so? Anlate breathed a sigh of relief. The words Wireless said next, however, made her anxious again. It's only temporary, though. While I managed to find something to suppress the poison's effects, he's still not completely detoxified yet. Is there anything we can do, sir? There is one thing, but it'll require you put in some effort. Why? Asked she curiously. While she had learned about poisons from Wireless before, her knowledge was far from Baylor's, who had been tutored personally by the president himself. All she could tell was that the poison was heat-aligned. It could burn lots of energy in Laguna's body in a short time. However, she had no idea how she could detoxify him. The poison Baylor made uses a strongly heat-aligned ingredient, the gallbladder of a flame salamander. When its essence enters the bloodstream, it will make a person's energy burn out incredibly quickly. In essence, Leguna isn't suffering from a poison, but rather the fever that the burning of his energy generates. It's incredibly serious. If his state isn't balanced soon, his body will be damaged and he'll die. Does Baylor have the antidote? Even Baylor wouldn't have the antidote. Wireless sighed. As long as the essence is in his bloodstream, his blood will keep boiling. While it isn't the most heat-aligned thing in the world, it's incredibly resilient. Using cold-aligned herbs to counteract it isn't a long-term solution, and he'll be burned to death if we don't do something quick. The only way to resolve this quickly is to use the glacial essence in your body. My glacial essence, repeated Anlate expressionlessly. That's right. Only by using the glacial essence in your water-swayer body can the flame salamander gallbladder's essence be counteracted quickly. I'm sure you're aware what price you'll pay. You'll lose 4 strata, explained Wireless as he stared at Anlate. I'll do it, nodded she resolutely. You'd swear losing 4 strata wasn't anything worth caring about. Wireless was rather shocked. While he'd expected her to agree, he didn't think she would do it without a shred of hesitation. The president sighed helplessly. Dumb girl, I'm sure you know the implications of losing 4 strata. I know. I'll become a low-order magus again. And you know this is exactly what Baylor was aiming for. Yes. While he looked like he was planning to assassinate Leguna, he was, in fact, working against me. While he doesn't dare to act against me personally, doing what he did would greatly decrease my abilities. I would no longer be a threat to him. And yet, you're willing? Asked Wireless with a hint of impatience. He didn't understand how the rational and strong-willed girl would be so rash now. Yes, I am. Wireless smacked his forehead, exasperated. Tell me, Anlate, have you fallen for this kid? I haven't, replied she frankly. Then, why are you willing to pay such a huge price for him? Because, sir, you had me stay by Laguna's side. While you didn't state it outright, It's obvious that you want me to protect him from Baylor. Now that I've failed, I must make amends. Wireless was flabbergasted by the unexpected rationalization Latte had come up with. He suspected the excuse's veracity, but seeing Annalot's serious expression, he couldn't help but trust her. In fact, Latte was completely serious. She did indeed think of it this way. As for whether there was something else behind her decision, nobody knew. What will you do after you become weak? Even if you want to recover, it'll take 2 years, more or less. Baylor is growing increasingly unstable, and he'll break free from my control completely soon. You'll be in great danger once that happens. Latte hesitated for a moment. I have companions. Leguna and the others will be with me. I believe they'll help me. Do you trust them? Latte recalled the courage and determination with which Leguna blocked the crystalback snow lizard's frost breath for her and nodded. Since Leguna trusts me, I will trust him as well. Is that so? Wireless mused. Very well. I hope he will not disappoint you. Help him detoxify then. I believe you know what to do. Latte bowed to Wireless before she walked over to Leguna. Old friend, it seems Leguna here didn't just influence Annie slightly. The change was far bigger than we imagined, muttered Wireless quietly as he looked at Annalot's back. The moment the blade pierced him, Leguna felt a rush of heat invade his body through the wound and spread to every corner of his body. It felt like he was being roasted all over, and the heat quickly knocked him out. He didn't know how long it took him to wake up. All he knew was that the heat in him had already dispersed. Someone cured me, thought he as he looked around. Neither Kurdak, nor Vera or Latte were anywhere to be seen. He didn't know where he was either. You're awake? Asked a deep voice. Leguna was stunned. There was a man seated behind a desk, not too far from him. When he looked at the man more intently, he started again. The person was not a man, but an elf. He had a head of long, silver blonde hair and long, pointy ears. His face also carried the same beauty seen on his brethren. However, the deep scar stretching from his left ear to the right corner of his mouth ruined everything. Are you the one who saved me? Thank you. As the elves of Nightsong Forest were the ones who'd saved Kurdak, Laguna's impression of elves was rather good, so he adopted a tone far more polite than usual. Kid, I had no way to save you. Someone else did, the elf said. Well, let me introduce myself. I am Wireless Deep Shadow, president of the Moonshadow Thieves. President helped Leguna with shock. The first impression he had of Wireless was that he was a powerless and nondescript elf. But now he'd called himself the president of Moonshadow. It made Leguna take a second look at the elf. He realized he couldn't feel a single ounce of power from him, even after a careful inspection. There were 2 possible explanations. The first was that the elf was indeed as normal and powerless as he'd thought. The other, that his control over his power had reached an unfathomable level. He could keep all his power inside his body and not let any escape. Seeing Laguna's suspicious expression, Wireless smiled. You don't believe me? Arikos, please come in. Understood, Mr. President, replied Arikos respectfully as he entered the room. You believe me now? Leguna stared wide-eyed at Arikos, the man he believed the strongest one he'd met in the last few months, answering to the beck and call of this elf with a respectful expression. Yes, Leguna gulped before he bowed. Leguna pays his respects to the president. All right, you may leave now, Arikos. Thank you. By your will. Arikos bowed before and left. What? Surprised? Asked Wireless, looking curiously at Leguna. I never thought the largest human thieves guild on Lance would have an elf as its president, answered Leguna with a bitter smile. Due to the fear and respect he had for a powerful person like Wireless, he lowered his head and didn't look him in the eye. I could be any race, gender, or age I want. Before Leguna noticed, Wireless's voice became husky, fitting of a seductress. When he looked up, he realized the man had turned into an unbelievably bewitching human woman with ink-blue hair and a voluptuous figure. Sir, Leguna jaw dropped to the floor. Want to learn how? The female asked, teasing smiled. Laguna's heart skipped several beats. Yes, please teach me, President. Too bad you can't learn it. It's elven magic. Marilyn's capriciousness had affected Wireless. Leguna was completely speechless. All right, I'll stop messing with you, Wireless said, returning to his elf form before anyone noticed. Even though you can't learn elven magic, I can teach you the disguise techniques used by assassins. Apart from that, I can teach you how to synthesize poisons, the secrets of stealth, and close combat techniques. In simple terms, I can make you stronger, much, much stronger. But you'll have to suffer a lot. Are you willing? Of course I am, President, exclaimed Leguna without hesitation. In this world, power was everything. Everyone yearned for it. I can also give you a huge sum of money. It'll be enough for you to live in luxury for the rest of your life. You'll no longer have to run errands out in the wilderness. You can only pick one, though, continued Wireless. Leguna began to hesitate. He'd wanted nothing more than to spend his days in comfort for the last 10 years of his pitiful life. It was why he wanted power. Now Wireless had offered exactly that to him. What reason was there to obtain power? He didn't know whether Wireless really do it, nor did he know which option to take. Before you make your decision, I should tell you a few things. I believe they'll influence your decision, Wireless said as he looked at the hesitating youth. First, I'd like you to know that you're born to be an assassin. You're a shadow dancer. A shadow dancer? Leguna had never heard of this before. You lack knowledge, but you should know that both impetus and magic have different aspects, right? There are 6 in total: wind, fire, earth, water, light, and darkness. The aspect that a person's impetus or magic manifests depends on their affinity for the 6 aspects. Take, for example, your boss. His body has high affinity for fire, so his impetus leans in that direction. Yours has an incredibly high affinity for darkness, explained Wireless slowly. Leguna nodded in agreement. While he had heard a few bits and pieces about aspects, it wasn't until Wireless's explanation that he had a clear understanding of them. There are people in this world that have a really high affinity for one or more aspects. Not only does it allow them to control those aspects easily, they will also develop unique abilities. For instance, in Latte. Since there's no longer a point in hiding it, I'll have you know that she's actually someone I sent to keep an eye on you. Annie. Laguna's heart skipped another beat. While he had an inkling it was her that had brought him here for detoxification, she was nowhere to be seen. As for whether she was a member of Moonshadow, he didn't care. After all, she had already saved his life a number of times and had never done anything against him. Wireless didn't care about what went through Laguna's mind. And Latte has an incredibly high affinity for water, so she has relative ease training in ice-related magic. Other than that, she also obtained abilities such as cold resistance and glacial domain. What are those? Leguna realized the president was more talkative than he'd expected. He no longer spoke formally and loosened considerably. Cold resistance, as its name suggests, allows her to withstand cold temperatures. Even temperatures down tens of degrees below zero can't harm her. No wonder Annie said she had a unique constitution. He'd been curious about how she could weather the chilling temperatures 40 below and more without batting an eye for a while now. Glacial Domain is an incredibly effective offensive ability. She can lower the temperature of an area with her will alone. It can go so low a person's blood would freeze. How horrifying! Though he already knew Latte was powerful, he didn't think she'd have such powerful abilities hidden away. That's why she's somewhat similar to you. She's a water swayer, light breaker, shadow dancer, wind walker, water swayer, fire guide, and earthbinder. Those are names others frequently use to describe those like the two of you who have aspect abilities. But, President, Leguna said with a bitter smile, I don't have any aspect abilities. Actually, from what I've observed so far, you do have one. As for your others, I believe they just haven't awakened yet. Wireless said as he took out a document and handed it to the kid. Look, according to our observations, even though you only have 6 stratum impetus, your potential is actually beyond the 10th stratum. This is one of your special abilities. This, Leguna didn't know whether he should be glad or not. Latte had a defensive ability, cold resistance, and an attack ability, glacial domain. The one he had only made him hide better. What should I call this? Zero presence? Don't look down on it, Wireless whispered into his ear from behind him suddenly. This is incredibly threatening. Think about it. You can approach your foe without the slightest sound. What other ability could be more useful to an assassin? Leguna dropped a few drops of ice-cold sweat. He looked down and realized the dagger was pushing against his throat. He had no idea when Wireless had brought it out or placed it against his throat. If he cut deep, he wouldn't even know how he died. What could my next ability be? Asked he excitedly. How should I know? There's no way to tell until it awakes, shrugged Wireless. Looking at the youth who was wearing a stupid smile, he snapped. Feeling full of yourself now, I wouldn't dare. Leguna tightened his facial muscles immediately. All right, I do think you have some right to be proud. If I had this ability, I wouldn't have suffered a loss against that old ruffian, said Wireless as he gave Leguna's shoulder a tap. His tone turned solemn almost immediately. However, never be overconfident. Even though only one person in tens of millions has these gifts, the sheer number of people alive means there are quite a few gifted around. You only have high affinity for the dark aspect. There are people who might have an incredibly high affinity with 2 or even 3 aspects. They will have even more terrifying gifts than you. Despite that, a large number of them die before becoming saint-ranked fighters or myth-level magi. You shouldn't be proud just because you're a shadow dancer. It's no doubt you're talented, but don't mistake it for power. Leguna hurriedly corrected his mindset. Wireless's words made sense. In a world as large as this one, even the strongest geniuses would be as common as clouds. Yet, people who were able to enter the saint or myth level were few and far in between. Compared to people with real power, talented geniuses were absolutely nothing. All right, I'm sure I've already made my first point clear. Now, here's the second one. You might have just made yourself an enemy. His name is Baylor. He's the guy that attacked you. Baylor. It was a name familiar to Leguna. In fact, it was burned deep into his memory. When he'd been eavesdropping on Jord during an odd job assignment not long ago, he'd overheard that very name. He knew right away that Baylor must have had something to do with the sudden orc attack his party had suffered. He had privately asked Sorum to get him some information about the man. It was too bad not a single trace of him could be found. As there was no evidence, Leguna didn't dare to tell Kurdak about Baylor. He was afraid he'd do something irrational, since Cyranos' death was a direct result of the attack. It went without saying how deep a bond Kurdak and Cyranos had. It was one that went beyond that of blood brothers. Wireless must know something about the man, since he'd brought up the name. Baylor is my disciple. My personal one, in fact, said Wireless. What? Cried Leguna with shock. Even though he had asked around about Baylor, he didn't expect the person who resulted in the death of Cyranos to be the disciple of Wireless himself. Are you surprised? Wireless asked with a smile. Then you're in for an even bigger shock. Not only is Baylor my disciple, he's also Vera's younger brother, her flesh and blood. What in the world's going on? If Baylor's Vera's younger brother, he should have been dead, said Leguna with a hoarse voice. Wireless had revealed things too far beyond his imagination. He needed a reasonable explanation to process it all. Actually, it isn't as complicated as you think, Wireless said. 7 years ago, Arikos encountered Baylor when he was on the way back from carrying out my orders. The kid had been engaged in a battle with a necromancer. Leguna's heart skipped a beat as he recalled Vera saying that her brother had died in a necromancer's hands. As she had already escaped, she had assumed there was no way Baylor could have survived. It seemed now that Arikos had saved him. Wireless continued. As he didn't have anything urgent to attend to, Arikos decided to watch how the battle unfolded. Baylor fought maniacally and managed to get close to dealing a fatal blow to his opponent quite a few times. But the huge difference in power kept him from going the whole way. Just as the necromancer was about to kill him, Arikos stepped in and stopped it, mainly because the child had awakened an ability during the battle. The wounds he dealt to the necromancer carried traces of dark aspect power that devoured what meager amount of life force a necromancer would have. That's right, Baylor also has an aspect ability. He is also a shadow dancer. Another shadow dancer, started Leguna. If Baylor was a shadow dancer, then what followed would be easy to guess. The necromancer probably had no choice but to release Baylor because he couldn't fight Arikos. Arikos recommended Baylor to Weyrless. Given that Weyrless appreciated Baylor's talent, he decided to secretly raise him as his disciple. But President, why isn't Baylor willing to reunite with Vera? As far as I know, he was the one who conspired with Jord on a scheme relating to the orcs. What's going on? I don't think I've ever done anything to piss him off. Why does he want to kill me? I knew Enlate wasn't up to anything good. Kurdak was pacing about in the inn impatiently. He had rushed back to Snowrock from Icepeak Mountain in 4 days. He thought he'd see Leguna back to full health and his sprightly self again. But not only did he not see the slightest trace of him, even Enlate had vanished into thin air. Kurdak, don't suspect Annie all the time. Even though she's a little mysterious, she hasn't done anything to us she has to feel sorry for so far, consoled Vera. Then where do you think the two went? That girl said she was bringing him back to detoxify him, but now they've just vanished. It took us 4 days to make it back, and we've even rested for 2 days since. Forget detoxification. Even if he got poisoned again, he would have had enough time to recover. Moonshadow is definitely plotting to do something with Leguna, exclaimed Kurdak with a furrowed brow. He was rather impatient as of late, possibly due to Leguna or the werewolf blood flowing in his veins. Maybe the poison Leguna got his special and needs more time? I'm also worried about Lay, but there's no point fussing over it. Do you think Moonshadow would go through all this trouble just to hurt him? That's ridiculous. Oomph. You women have lots of hair, but little brain. I forgot to tell you something. Lay is no normal person. In fact, he has an incredibly high affinity for darkness. He's a shadow dancer. Someone like him, who has 1 in 10 million properties, will obviously attract Moonshadow's attention, shouted Kurdak. He really didn't understand how Vera didn't have the slightest guard up against Enlate. She was obviously a dangerous woman. Mr. Kurdak, your knowledge is indeed vast. You're right. Leguna is a shadow dancer, said Enlate, who'd appeared in the inn's entrance without anyone noticing. Her delicate face looked a little pale, her sickly complexion oddly making her look more beautiful than usual, incredibly lovable. Annie, exclaimed Vera. But before she could say more, Kurdak rushed forward. Tell me how Leguna is doing right now. He glared at Enlate, not in the mood to act gentlemanly. Worried about him, Enlate didn't seem the least bit moved and returned Kurdak's stare. Naturally, he's my brother. I'll not allow anything bad to happen to him again. Vera raised her eyes at Kurdak's use of again. It seemed that while he didn't talk about it often, he was still quite hung up on Cyranos' death. She herself still couldn't move on either, having witnessed Cyranos' death struggle. He's fine. He just needs some time to recover. I promise, said Enlate calmly. Promise? How would you? Take me to him now. Otherwise, your promises don't mean anything, said Kurdak without bothering to keep his tone cordial. Enlate didn't get angry, though she answered with her frozen tone. Not possible. Calm down for now. You can see him in 2 days. See him? Do you mean his corpse? Are you guys experimenting on his body? I knew your guild was fixated on the powers of people like him. You definitely did something horrible to him. The more Kurdak went on, the more emotional he became. He even gave Enlate a slight push. While the push was an unintended act of reflex with not much force behind it, Analad's body unexpectedly swayed as she fell straight to the ground. Kurdak, calm down. Don't treat Annie like this, cried Vera as she hurriedly went to help the girl up. She was a delicate woman and had already noticed how weak the girl appeared when she entered. Enlate quietly got up. She didn't reveal even a hint of emotion on her face. Kurdak, your emotions are a little too uppity right now. It's best we talk later. I'll take my leave now. Kurdak realized he'd overstepped his bounds and looked at Enlate, surprised as she turned around. Wait, your power. Enlate stopped in her tracks. I know the gifted are incredibly rare, but Moonshadow hasn't stooped so low to experiment on them yet. And, apart from Leguna, who's a shadow dancer, I am a water swayer. I wonder if this will still some of your doubts. And Latte didn't turn back, and nobody could see what expression her beautiful face had, if any at all. You went too far this time. Vera rolled her eyes at the dumbstruck Kurdak and ran after Latte. From her point of view as a woman, she really felt he'd gone too far. She wanted to console Latte. Annie, I hope you don't stay mad. Kurdak's just too worried about Leguna. That's why he... Though Vera said that the moment she entered Analod's room, she couldn't help but feel troubled when she saw Analod's usual expressionless face. That was the most troublesome part of the girl. She never showed her emotions, and Vera found it hard to be specific about consoling her. Don't worry, sis. Sis Vera, I'm not angry, and Latte stammered. Kurdak's the leader. I'm glad he's someone worried about the lives of his party members. Hearing the chilling tone with which Latte uttered her words, Vera couldn't tell whether she was expressing her real thoughts or being sarcastic. She tried to say something else, but Kurdak barged into the room with a note in his hand. Something's going on, said Kurdak without dallying as he handed the note to Vera. It turned out that when they were in Ice Peak Mountain, something happened in Nightsong Forest. The orcs had attacked the gathering spots of Eye of Arcana a number of times in the last couple of days, and it no doubt completely enraged the proud and arrogant senior magi. The Eye's elders had decided to unite with the other 4 great factions to launch an attack on the Orcish settlement in the north. They would teach the lowly, ugly life forms a lesson they would not soon forget. The 4 factions pooled their funds for a bounty of 5 gold coins for every orc ear brought to them. Regardless of gender or age, each orc ear could be exchanged for 5 gold coins. This was an incredibly lavish reward in the eyes of many. Even normal folk without impetus could profit from the bounty by slaughtering elderly or young orcs for their ears. For each orc they killed, they would be rewarded 10 gold coins. This was 3 times the monthly income of the average person. Tempted by the lavish bounty, large numbers of human adventurers crossed Nightsong Forest and arrived in the orc territory. The note in Kurdak's hand was issued by the Union to encourage the strong and reputable mercenaries to join in the fight. "What do you two think?" asked he. It seemed he had calmed down completely already. "We should return to Starfall for a while. We'll head north after you absorb the Millennium Snow Lotus. This is a rare chance to train and get rich at the same time," offered Vera. "I thought so too, but Leguna..." Kurdak looked at Latte wordlessly. "We should head north. Leguna will be fine. He'll join us at Starfall in a few days." "I hope so." "Very well, let's polish our skills." The reason the two were able to come to such a quick decision was the grudge they held on account of Cyranos' death. And Latte, on the other hand, urgently needed much training to recover her lost power, and the Orcish settlement sounded like a decent place to get it. When making a decision, the best outcome is making the right one. After that is making the wrong one, but the worst is not making any. Wireless Deep Shadow. "The 3 questions you just posed are crucial," Wireless nodded. "I suppose the first one is pretty intuitive. According to Baylor's own words, Vera had abandoned him. She forced him to face off against an enemy far more powerful than him, alone. After being betrayed like that, it's only reasonable that he doesn't want to see her again. Sis isn't that kind of person," Leguna argued all of a sudden with a flushed look. "She's regretted her decision for the last 7 years. President, I hope you don't talk about her so distastefully again." Wireless was shocked. He didn't think the meek and humble little kid would snap so easily. Given that he was the head of Moonshadow, not many would speak to him in such a manner. Leguna quickly realized how rude he had been and lowered his head, embarrassed. But he had no intention to apologize. He felt doing so would be acknowledging Wireless's judgment. "Very well. It might be as you say, child, but it's still true that she abandoned him and escaped alone," sighed Wireless. Leguna was a little surprised that the president would compromise so easily. He realized Wireless wasn't wrong, though. Even if Vera regretted her decision later and changed for the better, it didn't change what had happened. She had left her only relative for dead and escaped, and that couldn't be changed no matter what. Regret did not excuse the action. What happened in the past would stay the same regardless of what was done in the present or the future. It was but a fact of life. So, Did I answer your first question? Yes. While he didn't want to admit it, he had no good reason to criticize Baylor's actions. If he himself was betrayed by someone he trusted immensely, how would he react? Very well. Now, for your second question. I'd like to ask you this. If the orcs had taken everything from you, what would you do when you finally had power? Me? Leguna gave it some thought. While he'd never had any family, he had experienced the pain of having everything he cared about taken from him. I would take revenge, Leguna said with certainty. I would want to let them experience my rage. I would want to let every single one experience the pain I'd have experienced. I would do anything I could to achieve that. Correct. That's what Baylor intends as well, concluded Wireless with a snap of his fingers. Even though it was a gesture only humans used, given that he was an elf that had lived among humans for many years, it wasn't surprising that he understood their culture better than his own races. So, Baylor, Leguna finally caught on. Baylor's abilities have improved at an incredible rate over the last couple of years. His desire to use his power to take revenge has grown proportionally as well. His target is naturally the orcs and the necromancer that almost killed him. Kurdak and Cyranos killed the necromancer already, though. So Baylor changed his target to the eye. As Wireless spoke, he handed a stack of documents to Leguna, believing that he could understand them. It wouldn't be hard to see from these reports that Baylor's power has indeed grown over the years, allowing him to slowly escape the guild's control. He's already started to ignore my orders. Leguna flipped through the documents. Everything about Baylor and his life from the moment he joined the guild was recorded in them. There was even a brief description of Baylor's assassination of the noble at Brisonus. In actuality, the Brisonus incident's true culprit wasn't Orwin, but Baylor. Baylor had been mobilized the same time Orwin had. Orwin was sent to Brizones to stall for time and cause chaos without him knowing the true purpose of his mission, whilst Baylor used the commotion to kill the noble. Given that his identity was to be kept hidden, Orwin got recognition for the kill instead. The most pitiful one in this whole business was no doubt Orwin. All he had been tasked with was to cause chaos, only to end up Baylor's scapegoat. After the incident, Orwin somehow got credited with the kill. The poor fool didn't think for a moment about the fact that he was used as a scapegoat and instead basked in the limelight, causing him to be known as a maniacal murderer in Starfall. Leguna was greatly surprised by the document's contents. Not only was he awed by Baylor's impressive feats, he was also taken aback by Moonshadow's information-gathering prowess. Even though Wireless claimed Baylor had already escaped the guild's control, the reports made it seem like they still had a firm leash on him. If Wireless wished, Leguna didn't doubt he could know everything down to what he ate or drank. He felt a deep sense of reverence for Moonshadow's mastery of information-gathering. Baylor had been inciting conflict between the orcs and the Eye in the last couple of years with the goal of causing a fight between the two factions. Now it seems he succeeded. So, the orcs showed up in Nightsong Forest because of Baylor's provocations? Yes. As for whether he intentionally found your location and led the orcs to you, I can't be sure. However, I doubt he'd change his plans even if he knew about your presence. Damn! Leguna felt a ball of fire rise up in his throat. Not only had Baylor provoked the orcs, he also indirectly caused Cyranos' death and endangered his one and only sister's life. It seemed his personality was utterly twisted. As if he knew Leguna's thoughts, Wireless dictated a small elven magic spell calm him down. He breathed slowly and comfortably. Now that Cyranos was dead, there was no point in staying mad. He tried his best to calm his feelings and continue analyzing the reports. Most of the funds Baylor used in his plots came from Jord's wallet. As for what he promised in return, it was probably something along the lines of using his status as a member of Moonshadow to make Jord the mayor of Starfall. After a few moments, he couldn't help but start. According to the reports, the Eye had already united with the other factions to wage a war against the orcs in the north. Even though it wasn't war in the traditional sense, one between nations with clear borders, most of the human experts on Lance were invading Orcish territory and stirring up storms between the two races. President, these days, asked he, pointing at the report. Just as it says, Eye of Arcana is offering huge bounties to attract experts to invade Orcish territory. The war should have been going on for 2 days already. Then, President, since Moonshadow is aware of this, why didn't it stop them? He might not know much, but he understood a war between races like this would spill blood and end countless lives. What would you have me do? Do you want me to tell the Eye that there's a misunderstanding between them and the orcs, and that everything was my disciples' fault? This, Wireless sighed. That's why the guild cannot and will not stop this. The main actors are the Eye and the orcs. No matter how it turns out, our guild probably won't suffer too much. In fact, there's a good chance for us to reap huge profits. I don't see the need to stop this. But President, these are countless lives we're talking about. Leguna had wanted to say something more, but he stopped. Wireless suddenly stretched both his hands to Leguna. How much can these hands hold? Leguna gazed back at him, not understanding the intention behind the gesture. The elf didn't wait for his answer. Little. Far too little. This world is huge, unimaginably so. Even 100-armed giants' many hands are far from enough to grasp the whole world. I will not waste my energy on things that have nothing to do with me. We need to keep what we have clutched tightly. To me, Moonshadow is what I have, so I will hold on to it for dear life. I don't care much about anything else. I couldn't care even if I wanted to. After a period of silence, he asked Leguna, "What do you hold in your hands right now?" Leguna hesitated. He didn't know how to answer. Wireless didn't expect an answer anyway. Enlatte was the one who helped detoxify you. Yes. You were poisoned with something with a lot of heat energy. Enlatte used the glacial essence in her body, the essence she'd accumulated over many years to neutralize it. She used nearly half for your sake. As a result, her level has dropped 4 strata. Wireless dropped another bomb on Leguna without hesitation. "What?" cried he with widened eyes. He might have known the poison was very strange, but he didn't think Enlatte had to sacrifice this much for his sake. "You're a shadow dancer, so I've been secretly monitoring you since you arrived on Lance. I've been considering whether to take you on as my disciple. Baylor felt threatened by you as a result, and has made the first move against you. Is this why he wants me dead?" He didn't think Vera's brother had such a ridiculous temperament. He hadn't done anything to or against him, but because he might become his junior, Baylor didn't hesitate to plunge a dagger into his chest. "Well, you can say that. Only truly distinguished disciples of mine can get my inheritance, and Baylor feels you are a threat to him. Naturally, he held himself back when he acted against you. If he'd used his gift, Black Curse, when he struck you, there would have been no way you could have survived. Then why didn't he just kill me? Because of me. He was worried killing you would enrage me. So he chose to heavily wound you instead and use this opportunity to weaken Annie, who's already chosen to stand on your side." Leguna finally understood. He and Baylor were like 2 crickets locked in a boxing arena, and Wireless was the audience. He would pick the stronger cricket and properly develop it as his successor. Though Baylor could have killed him before he developed, and in it all, Wireless's presence made him have some reservations. Enlatte had appeared on Laguna's side all of a sudden, though, and the alliance of 2 gifted put a lot of pressure on him. He had no choice but to take the action he had to even the playing field to whatever he considered even anyway. He chose to wound Leguna, knowing that Enlatte would be forced to weaken herself to save him. At first, I had Enlatte stay by your side as a warning to Baylor that I was observing you, so he wouldn't run amok. I didn't think he would interpret it as me placing Enlatte on your side. That's what prompted his desperate attack. I had no choice but to reveal myself to you and tell you the whole story. I don't really fault Baylor, though. Based on how intimate Enlatte was with you, she has indeed chosen to stand on your side. Wireless shook his head and laughed bitterly. He didn't think his obedient Enlatte would make this choice of her own volition. Enlatte? Intimate with me? Leguna couldn't believe it no matter what. The girl's personality was completely unpredictable, and even he had a hard time dealing with her. Most of the time, he didn't know what to do about her chilling aura. He couldn't see the intimacy Wireless mentioned no matter how he tried. "All right, I've answered your 3 questions. Now, can you make your choice?" said Wireless, returning to the matter at hand. "According to my observations, You are qualified to become my disciple. Now, it's your turn to make the choice. What will it be? Power or wealth? If you choose wealth, you will be one of my subordinates. Serve me with your abilities as a shadow dancer, and I will provide you with endless wealth. If you choose power, you'll be my second disciple. I will make you powerful, far more than you can imagine. However, you have to face Baylor and you might die. But the moment you defeat him, you'll inherit everything I have. President, if I choose not to fight with Baylor, will he really let me off? Will he let Annie off as well? Wireless shook his head. I don't know. Baylor's personality has become really hard to predict. I can't ensure your safety. Then, I never had a choice, Leguna said as he raised his head to look the tall elf in the face. Including this time, Annie should have saved me 4 times already. Given how much she's done for me, how can I be so shameless as to watch from the sidelines without a way to ensure her safety? Wireless smiled as he looked Leguna in the eye. He saw the fire of his soul in them, a flame that could swallow the world whole. So, what's your decision? I want power. I want to become stronger. So strong that I won't be at the mercy of others. So strong that I can protect the people around me. That I can give that crazy little brother a huge beating so he'll return to Sis's side, declared Leguna, solemnly. He was resolute. It would take him very long to realize the price for these words was his life. Wireless nodded solemnly. Very well. From today onwards, you are officially my second disciple. I gave Baylor the moniker Nightblade. I give you the moniker Dark Requiem. Leguna Dark Requiem. I hope this new name will inspire fear and reverence from all in the times to come. I hope you will become my most distinguished disciple, one of which I can be proud. Leguna will not let teacher down. Leguna tried to look as serious as he could, but he wasn't sure whether he'd answered in the correct manner. It would suck if he ruined the stern atmosphere his teacher was trying to create. A few days later, in Kurdak's room in Shining Star of Starfall, Enlate waved her hand to dispel the inspection spell she used with Hidden Surprise. Even though she'd already predicted her greatly decreased rank would affect her power a lot, she didn't think it would be that bad. A simple inspection spell cost her so much magical power. It was unthinkable not too long ago. People used to being strong would have a hard time after suddenly becoming weak. While Enlate was surprised, she didn't feel disheartened or regretful because, while losing 4 Strata was a huge blow, it wasn't something she couldn't accept. She was confident it was just a matter of training and improving in time. Enlate had always been highly confident. The Millennium Snow Lotus was properly absorbed. Your lifespan's increased by 10 years, reported she. Great. 10 years should be enough to find more things with which to increase your lifespan. Vera was the first one to cheer out. Ah, I told you I won't be done in this easily. I'm tougher than I look, you know, snapped Kurdak. He had already made peace with the fact that he wouldn't live much longer. But now, he was surprised that he'd somehow managed to survive the ordeal. I have to remind you that this is only the time you have now. If you're hurt again, you'll eat up your lifespan. You're a mercenary, so injuries are commonplace. With this taken into account, you probably only have about 5 years. Enlate doused Kurdak's flaming passion without mercy. Ever since they'd returned from Snow Rock, Enlate hadn't bothered to act polite. Her tone always carried a tinge of insult and disdain. But neither of the two present took offense. Given that it was Kurdak's fault for acting the way he did back at the inn, it was only natural that she showed displeasure. In fact, her show of emotions was a good thing. It showed that she was no longer cold and indifferent. From another point of view, the young girl could be said to have accepted Kurdak and the mercenary party as a whole. No worries. A few years more to live is still something. We'll leave the rest to the future. Asterisk. Enlate looked at Kurdak coldly. She didn't respond. Knock, knock, knock. Enlate, being the closest to the door, opened it. Leguna stood outside. After he'd spent a few days recovering at Snow Rock, he had been rushing to Starfall without rest. He thought Vera or Kurdak would open the door. Unexpectedly, Enlate was the first one he saw. Well, long time no see, muttered he. He'd been rather troubled about how to act in front of her since he'd learned about what she'd done for him. He had been pondering what he should say to her when they met. He had considered crying a bunch and holding Analot's hand as he said, "Thank you. Thank you so much for what you did for me. I'm really touched. I'll remember this in the future." However, he felt his pathetic look would only tempt her to send a fireball flying into his face. He had also considered wearing a beaming smile and patting the girl's shoulders while saying, "I already know everything. There's nothing to be said. Just watch me. I will protect you in the future. I'll beat them all, regardless of whether they're Baylor or the orcs." But he felt feigning bravery and courage would similarly invite a fireball. He had even thought of pretending to be mute or pretending he didn't know anything. That way, Analot's proud and aloof appearance wouldn't be unraveled, and no fireballs would touch his face anytime soon. But he felt if he really dared to do so, he would be the one looking to smash his face into a fireball. Even after having thought about it intensely for the last couple of days, he still couldn't settle on a course of action. Given that their meeting was a little unexpected, all he could say was "long time no see." And Latte nodded. When he appeared in front of her alive and well, an undistinguishable trace of joy flashed through her eyes. "You're back." Leguna smiled awkwardly. "I know what you did." "Well, thank you." Seeing Leguna make a face that seemed to spell, "We did something unspeakable," and Latte seemed to be affected as well. With an awkward look, she nodded without saying anything else. "Oh, Brat, you're back," Kurdak said as he marched out of the house and shouted, "Vera, Lay's back." Leguna heard Vera's surprised gasp. After some hurried footsteps, she came out as well. "Boss, sis." Seeing his two elder siblings filled Leguna with joy. Had it not been for Enlate, he couldn't have met the two again. At this time, the girl took a few steps back and stood behind Kurdak. "Come in. Let's talk inside," said Kurdak as he patted on his back. The kid was scrawny as ever, but in good shape and didn't seem to be hurting anywhere. After going inside, Leguna informed his companions of his experiences briefly. The two were told that the poison was only neutralized thanks to the huge price Enlate had paid. They also knew how he'd become one of the main targets to be developed by Moonshadow and the fearsome enemy he would have to face. Naturally, he kept some things to himself. He didn't tell Kurdak that he had become the personal disciple of the guild's president, and didn't say anything about the fact that his enemy was a disciple of the same master, or that he was Baylor, Vera's brother. It wasn't that he didn't trust the two, just that carelessly revealing some things could get them involved in lots of trouble. Additionally, given the sensitive nature of Baylor's identity, he decided it was best Vera didn't know about it for now. "Boss, this enemy is incredibly dangerous. In the future, you should..." Leguna had wanted to say something, but he couldn't. It didn't stop Kurdak from guessing what he was trying to say. He gave back of his head a smack. "Stinking brat, what are you thinking? I worked so hard to haul you back from Silvermoon Forest and brought you along as a fellow mercenary. Yet, now you have Moonshadow, you're going to leave us behind. Forget it. There's no way you'll push us away so easily. But boss, that guy is really fearsome. You weren't there to see him strike." Before Leguna could finish, Kurdak waved to stop him. "All right, Lay. You don't have to say anything. Like you said, that enemy is incredibly fearsome. But you're not even that strong yet. Do you think we could hide and leave you alone to face him? Do you think your boss is this kind of person?" Leguna opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was well aware of Kurdak's personality and knew this wasn't a matter he could leave alone, given that his two companions were already so close. Even if the two distanced themselves from him, he didn't think Vera's younger brother would let them off. That was why even he wasn't that convinced in his attempt to persuade them. "All right, I understand," said Leguna after a long moment. He realized he already had responsibilities weighing on his back. He had to carry his three companions, so he had to get strong quickly. Strong enough to protect them all. Is this what it means to be responsible? In the past, he was only able to experience some form of responsibility towards Aaron. But after she'd vanished, what little responsibility he had disappeared as well. But now he finally got to feel what it was like to be responsible for others. Many people would collapse under this kind of responsibility, but Leguna wasn't one. He now felt he wasn't something insignificant the world could lose without noticing. He now had people who needed him. He was no longer a purposeless zombie trying to pass the time. It went without saying that this feeling was rather new in his 10-odd years, fresh and pleasing. His blood boiled. Kurdak didn't know anything about the resolution Leguna now had. However, he suddenly stood up and bowed to Enlate deeply. His actions didn't surprise just his two companions. Even the ever-expressionless Enlate flashed a look of astonishment. "I apologize for my behavior, Miss Enlate. I was too anxious. I shouldn't have doubted you, or Moonshadow. I shouldn't have taken my anger out on you. I've said horrible things to you, Laguna's savior. This all happened because I couldn't make the proper judgment. I hope you can forgive me. Once again, I am sorry." Kurdak's tone was sincere and had a tinge of regret. He'd never imagined Enlate would pay such a huge price to save Leguna. If it were him, even though he would make the same choice, if someone else doubted his intentions, he would definitely argue or even fight with them. That was why when Leguna explained how he was detoxified, Kurdak understood how troubled Enlate must have been. He also believed he had to sincerely apologize to her. As Leguna didn't know what had happened between the two, he had wanted to butt in and say something. But Vera stopped him, shaking her head lightly. As a witness to what had happened, she believed an apology was due. Apart from the fact that Kurdak was obviously in the wrong, Enlate was the sole magus their party had. If the party leader himself didn't apologize for a misunderstanding, not only would it displease the party's members, it would also cause internal strife that would eventually tear it apart. So, she stopped Leguna. The youth trusted her judgment and kept his silence. Enlate shook her head, not bothering to stand up. The rest thought it meant she wasn't willing to forgive Kurdak. They didn't expect what she said a moment later. "I never took that seriously. I knew you were worried about Leguna, and it's all too normal for you to lose control. Since I didn't lose much, there's no need to apologize." Enlate sounded rather stiff when saying those words, causing the rest to be unsure whether she meant what she said or she was just venting her anger. With Kurdak not knowing whether he should stop bowing or not, the situation turned incredibly awkward. Thankfully, Leguna understood Enlate a little better. He knew the girl could put up a good front and articulate herself well during socialization. But when she had to face a person seriously, she would turn into an ill-spoken introvert. Her words were unquestionably sincere. "Well, boss, since Annie's spoken, there's no need to keep it up. Think about it. Given Annie's personality, there's no way she would say something she doesn't mean," said Leguna as he looked at Enlate and seemed to gesture to her. She was a little surprised at first, but soon realized her bad choice of words. "Mr. Kurdak, I really don't blame you. We're incredibly fortunate to have a party leader that cares so much for his members. I only hope you will act more rationally from now on. After all, you're the core of the party, and your rashness might endanger it." "All right, I'll accept your suggestion," replied Kurdak seriously. After that, the four discussed their upcoming adventure to Orcish territory before having a meal together. The next few days saw Kurdak and the rest preparing for their next adventure. Even though Leguna had already become Wireless's disciple, only a small number of people were informed in consideration of Leguna's safety. So, he was still considered a member of the odd job division and worked a few jobs at Sorum's during the days they were preparing. Since Analot's identity was already made known to Kurdak's party, there was no longer a need to keep anything secret. So, she told them her address and stayed cooped up at home. Nobody knew what she was up to. Another half a month passed, and Leguna had finally finished the assignment Sorum had given him. Kurdak and Vera also made lots of preparations in the meantime. With everything in place, they notified Enlate of their decision to depart for their next quest in 2 days. Thanks to years of isolation from each other, most of the humans didn't know the orc situation. With the recent large-scale human invasion, however, the orcs' mysteries were being unraveled. Their territory was simply known as the Wild Flatlands. It was an incredibly impoverished and chaotic area because of the various Orcish tribes there. Most were autonomous and competed fiercely with each other for dominance and resource. Usually, this degree of conflict would easily draw external threats. But given their strong reproductive capabilities and incredible hardiness, humans were unwilling to go through the trouble of conquering such infertile land. In fact, there have been instances of orc tribes moving south to cause trouble in human territory, which resulted in a number of orc invasions. However, the chaos in Orcish society all ceased with the appearance of one orc. His name was Alderac. Alderac Earth-Shaking Hammer. Originally a young shaman of the Earth-Shaking Hammer clan, he showed astounding courage and wisdom during the clan's campaigns. As his contributions increased, Alderac soon developed an impressive reputation in his clan. When the previous clan chief passed on, Alderac succeeded him without the slightest hesitation or contestation. At first, many suspected Alderac's abilities to lead the clan because of his youth. But the things that happened later made these sentiments evaporate completely. When he took on the mantle of clan leader, Alderac demonstrated impressive leadership capabilities. He used his wisdom and foresight to expand the Earth-Shaking Hammer clan. He led the clan on conquests all over, and in 4 short years, he'd swept the whole of the Wild Flatlands and united the chaotic society of orcs into a great and cohesive empire. He became great chief of all the orcs of the empire. After years of internal strife, the new empire was rather weak. So, Alderac tightened his grip on his subordinates and prohibited them from doing anything that would provoke the humans. But due to Baelor's schemes, war broke out between the two species regardless. With the humans suddenly invading, the orcs couldn't be more welcoming of a good fight. As opposed to the ragtag bunches of adventurers that came, the unified orc army was far more effective on the battlefield. In the first few days alone, large numbers of small adventurer parties were wiped out, and they profited greatly from their spoils for a while. The humans, who'd learned their lesson, quickly came up with a countermeasure. Instead of traveling in small hunting parties, they formed huge mercenary bands up to 1,000 strong. While these bands weren't as disciplined as a proper army, their impressive strength and numbers allowed them to put up a good fight. While Alderac was furious over the invasion, he didn't dare use all the Empire's might to clear them out. He knew doing so would only serve to anger the humans even further. If he did, the 4 factions might go all out and send their best forces. The Orc Empire would be wiped out if that happened. Compared to the Federation of the 9 cities, the new Orc Empire was weak, very weak. Alderac had no choice but to give up on a small portion of his territory and send some Orc warriors to stop the invaders. It displeased the great chief greatly. It was like his empire was merely being used as training fodder. Though most of the humans chose to join large mercenary bands during their invasion, there were a good number of experts who went about in small parties. Kerdak's party was one of these. Their members averaged the 7th stratum, 2 of whom were freakishly gifted to boot. With Analot's participation, the overall might of Kerdak's party almost doubled. While they weren't willing to cause trouble for 100-man orc patrol units, they could deal with smaller orc squads 5 to 6 times their size easily. In that fashion, Kerdak led his 3 comrades carefully through the Wild Flatlands, harvesting the lives of orcs nonstop. From time to time, they returned to Starfall to exchange their spoils for money, take half a month of rest, before returning to the Wild Flatlands. Fight, rest, rest, fight. The days repeated routinely, but the Eye of Arcana's orc bounty didn't halt even once. In a flash, 2 years passed. Given that the Magi were able to continue paying the bounty off for that long a time, not only were the humans shocked at the depth of the Magi's pockets, they also resolved themselves to make more money while they could. Over the last 2 years, Leguna had also gotten used to a life of adventure and fighting. Even a super miser like him managed to amass quite a bit of wealth. But most importantly, alongside the nonstop battles he found himself in, the hidden potential of a shadow dancer gradually awakened. With the passing of time, the lanky youth grew at an astonishing rate. Leguna was fast asleep. He had already been rushing about the Wild Flatlands for 2 days, and finally, the day when he didn't have to take up night watch had come. So, he slept incredibly soundly. All of a sudden, a sharp whistling sound echoed over the flat horizons. The whistle should have brought lots of attention to it, but oddly, neither Kerdak, who was on night patrol, nor Vera or Anlate, sound asleep, reacted. He buried his head deeper into his sleeping bag, as if it could help him drown out the sound. However, it continued to assault his ears and wouldn't go away no matter how he turned about. His eyes opened and his brows furrowed. It's that darn old guy again. The hell's he skipping sleep to mess with me at this time of the night? Though he was filled with dread and frustration, he could do nothing but pack up his gears sourly. Kurdak pulled the blanket tighter. Though it was just before summer solstice, the flatlands were rather cold at night. They were in Orcish territory, so they didn't dare start a campfire. A fire in the dark would attract orcs the way cow droppings attracted flies. He could only use a blanket to keep warm. Though Kurdak noticed the ruffling in the tent behind him, he didn't really mind it. After a while, Leguna came out, looking prepared to leave. Kurdak looked closely at the youth. He'd been just a dirty, scrawny brat 2 years earlier. But for some reason, maybe because of the better living conditions he now enjoyed, his height had shot up. He'd gone from 1.6 meters to almost 1.8. His baby face had even matured somewhat. While he still looked on the slender side, his current form could be considered that of a youth of refined and handsome looks. "They're calling for you again?" asked Kurdak casually. He knew Leguna was Moonshadow's main target for development. From time to time, there would be summoned for him to carry out some missions on the premise of training. "Yes, I can't even get good sleep." After Leguna's apple developed, his voice had deepened considerably and no longer sounded as childish as before. Kurdak looked at his unwilling expression and chortled. "If it weren't for their training, would you have improved so quickly? You've almost caught up to me. You've shot from a 6 to the 11th stratum in just 2 years. What kind of shit did you eat to grow so fast?" I'm still far from being able to compare with you or Annie. That girl's already at the 13th stratum. Feeling the pressure, boss, teased the kid. "Why would I be pressured? Only madmen would bother competing with you freaks." Kurdak countered with a carefree shrug. "All right, run along now. Remember to come back early. We head home in 2 days." Leguna nodded and turned to leave. Not long after, he disappeared into the night. Merrilet sat on a rock leisurely and hummed a bad-sounding tune. From time to time, he blew the whistle in his hand twice. "Little bastard, I don't believe you won't come," said Merrilet gleefully. "Can't you come find me at a more normal time? Midnights are for sleep, you know," said Leguna without reservation as his figure showed up next to the old man all of a sudden. He'd frequently been given training assignments since he became Wireless's disciple. The one usually in charge of notifying him was Arikos. But from time to time, the old man who looked decent on the surface but was actually incredibly crude would take Arikos' place. As for Wireless, he had also met up with him in the same fashion a number of times, but it was really uncommon. All he knew about the old man was his name and the fact that he was Wireless's friend. But given the fact that his teacher associated with a ruffian like this, he'd begun to suspect his elven teacher's character. "This time, it's a sweet mission. If you dare carry this out in the day, I won't stop you," said Merrilet plainly as he took out a crumpled paper strip and handed it to Leguna. The youth couldn't help but roll his eyes. Though the old ruffian dressed incredibly elegantly, the paper strip he took out looked more crumpled than toilet paper. He forced himself to read the words by the moonlight. As Merrilet had mentioned, it was a sweeper. The target: the orcs camping at Twilight Oasis in the Flatlands. The squad's average stratum was 6, give or take, and there were about 20 in total. His mission was to head there and exterminate everyone. Given that they averaged 6 stratum despite having 20, they should be an elite squad. If it were 2 years ago, Leguna would rather risk touching Vera's but than provoking it. But after 2 years of training, his practical combat experience had grown rich. While the mission was rather difficult, it wasn't as tough as the last few he'd gotten. They nearly cost him his life. Given that he'd already survived these ordeals, what was there to fear from this one? "That's simple," Merrilet nodded. He recalled something a moment later and added, "Oh, and they seem to have a human captive. If you see him, bring him back to your campsite." "Our campsite? What?" This was the first time he'd received such a request. "You'll understand when you do it," Merrilet said cryptically. That little beauty in your party is doing fine, right? Old pervert, don't set your sights on Annie all the time. Damn it, you're old enough to be her dad." Leguna knew to whom Merrilet referred. Every time he met the old man, he'd ask about Latte. At first, he thought it was just the old man expressing worry for a fellow guild member. But as he got to know more about his personality, he began to suspect his intentions. "You little bastard, I am her father. Just you wait. If I really end up your father-in-law one day, I'll make sure you suffer. Otherwise, I won't be the Gale Storm Sword Saint," cursed Marilet under his breath. All he could do, though, was snap back at Leguna without daring to reveal the truth. Leguna didn't let up either and cursed back at him as he ran towards his destination until the two were out of earshot. The orc campsite was rather easy to spot. The simple-minded buffoons lit bonfires in such an obvious manner, as if they were afraid Leguna would have a hard time finding them. He hid in a dark corner and observed quietly. There were 4 orcs on night patrol who were seated around a rectangular pyre. Though they were talking loudly in Orcish, their comrades sleeping in the rundown tents didn't seem disturbed. Instead, one could say they were joining in with their snoring. The youth patiently waited, relaxing. He wasn't tense, even though there was a large battle awaiting him. Wireless had given him lots of training to mold his mental fortitude. Currently, even if a dagger was thrust at his brows, he wouldn't bat an eye. He kept on going through the measures he should take in the event of his plan going wrong, as well as his possible escape routes. After making sure everything was in order, he finally made his move. He stimulated his impetus slightly. The deep black aura that coated his form helped him blend naturally into the night, greatly increasing his stealth. He trod lightly, barely making the slightest sound. The 4 orcs were right in front of him, but due to their loud chattering, they didn't notice him coming closer. The shadowy figure suddenly shot out from the darkness. His left hand clutched the mouth of an orc to prevent it from making a sound while his right swung. 3 impetus-infused, throwing blades struck the 3 others' throats. He drew his mithril dagger and severed the orc he was holding's throat. Everything happened in a split second. Even though the orcs weren't rookies, his surgical precision and lightning attack ended their lives in an instant. He quietly put the corpse in his hand down before listening carefully. When he was certain there weren't any weird movements coming from the others, he entered the tents with his dagger. 5 orcs died in their sleep. Trails of fresh blood flowed in the tent and formed a garish pasture of flowers. Leguna calmly collected their lives. The slumbering orcs were sheep waiting to be slaughtered. He didn't feel the slightest sympathy for them. Every time he felt a hint, he forced himself to think about Cyranos' death. It would invariably turn him back into a cold and ruthless reaper. Though what he was doing was cruel, it was really effective. He had a steely resolve whenever he faced his enemies. He stepped outside lightly and entered the second tent. His face was stained with blood. His crimson-soaked body made him look all the more sinister. Half a minute later, he stepped out of the second tent. Just as he was about to harvest third tent's occupants, a weird, loud sound rang out. He quickly discovered movement within the third. I gave your little game a slight twist. Otherwise, it would be far too pointless. The orcs shouldn't just die in their sleep. Even though Marilet was nowhere to be seen, his voice resounded clearly in Laguna's ear. "Old guy, you're always acting like a freaking troll," cried he furiously. Leguna drew his longsword. It was the very one he had picked up 2 years ago at Ice Peak Mountain. At the time, he hadn't really thought about it and swiped it for use because it was convenient. However, Wireless realized that it was a decent weapon and had him put to good use. Though the sword was originally shiny and sharp, after 2 years of slaughtering, the blade had gradually darkened. The jewel in the hilt had become darker and glossier as well. Thus, Leguna named the sword after this unique property, Lighteater. It was worth mentioning that though Lighteater had turned darker than it was when first picked up, its sharpness had increased. So, he felt it was quite a delight to use. He swung Lighteater with his right hand and Flameblade with his left. As the dagger constantly radiated an eye-catching magic glow, Leguna couldn't use it during assassinations, only in straight-up combat. 6 orcs howled as they rushed out of their tent. Looking at their 4 collapsed comrades and the 2 bloody tents, they let out another enraged roar. Leguna regulated his breathing gradually. After making sure he was back in perfect condition, his figure launched forward explosively. Lighteater was employed really skillfully to parry an axe swing. He used Flameblade to deal with the first orc in the blink of an eye. The 5 remaining orcs all charged forward, waving their weapons. They saw how strong the human was, but the great warriors of Earth-Shaking Hammer did not fear strong foes. Even though Leguna could take the life of one enemy before they were able to react, being charged at and encircled by 5 was still a rather dangerous affair. Faced with 5 orcs enraged to the core, he was practically a small boat embroiled in the huge waves of a stormy sea. Carefully avoiding their attacks, he took the occasional opportunity afforded by his opponent's mistakes to launch savage counterattacks. He didn't use other tools during the fight. If he had used smoke pellets or opted for a more defensive and aversive fighting style, he would have had a much easier time dealing with his 5 foes. But he was aware why Merrillet woke the other 6 to train his combat abilities. 6 orcs weren't too many or too few for him to handle. As long as he treated it seriously, he could take out all of them despite how dire it seemed at first. Naturally, if he was the slightest bit careless, there was a chance he would end up the corpse instead. That was why, despite the fact that he was dissatisfied with Merrillet's meddling, he still went along with the old ruffian's arrangements. He dealt with their onslaught carefully and tried his best not to reveal any openings. After a while, one of the orcs lost his patience and raised his wolf fawn club high and slammed it down. Easily sidestepping the attack, Leguna took advantage of the moment it took the orc to recover to cut off his head. The death of yet another orc reduced the pressure on him substantially. But he didn't relax. He kept his stance stable. Not long after, another orc made a mistake. Naturally, Leguna didn't let the chance slip by and ended his life as well. The rest of the battle unfolded in a much more relaxed fashion. Leguna calmly dealt with the rest of his opponents. After scouring the battlefield to make sure none of his foes were still alive, he entered the 3rd tent. Greeted with the famous Orcish body odor, Leguna couldn't help but furrow his brow. Using Flameblade's glow, he carefully inspected the interior and noticed a human in a corner. It was a middle-aged man about 40 years old. He was clad in hunting garb made from animal furs. The furs, however, were already torn beyond saving and revealed much of his injured and battered body. After giving him a simple check to make sure he was still alive, Leguna knew he should be the man Merrillet mentioned. Perhaps due to the orc's torture, he was still unconscious. Leguna didn't bother to wake him up either. To prevent him from attacking him, should he regain consciousness, he bound his hands and feet with a rope he found in the tent before hauling him out. He didn't bother to look for Merrillet either. Since he had already completed the assignment, he couldn't wait to distance himself from the senile geriatric as much as possible. Leguna returned to the camp as the sun climbed out of bed. The orange-red sun rose from the east slowly and illuminated the desolate ground, giving it a touch of vastity and majesty. Kurdak was still tightly huddling his blanket. The first rays of the day couldn't bring him much warmth. Seeing Leguna approach, he waved to signal everything was in order. "I'm finally done. Damn, I'm worn out. I doubt I can go anywhere today," said the kid as he put the old man on the ground and tossed a bag containing 40 orc ears over. Kurdak gave it a count and exclaimed, shocked, "Not bad. You got 200 gold coins from a simple trip in the night? All right, I'll let you off today without throwing you into the fray. You just have to do some light fighting." "Sigh, that amount of gold is only enough for gear maintenance," said Leguna with a smug shrug. The party's abilities had more than doubled after 2 years of continuous training, so they didn't really see 200 gold coins as impressive anymore. However, it was still quite a substantial amount, definitely good for more things than merely repairing their gear like Leguna had suggested. Kurdak gave Leguna a light punch. "Getting snobby now, aren't we? Who's this, by the way?" Leguna gave the man a glance and shook his head. "I don't know either. I saw him in the orc campsite. He's been unconscious the whole time. Should we wake him and ask him directly?" "Sure." Kurdak retrieved his flask and poured some cold water on the stranger's face. He gradually opened his eyes. The moment he saw 2 curious human faces looking at him, surprise flashed across his eyes. "%. At $%," cried the man alertly. The 2 looked at each other strangely. "Why is he speaking Orcish?" "How would I know? Weren't you the one who brought him back?" I just found him last night, you know. Noticing something was off, the middle-aged man muttered, Who? Who are you? Oh, you speak the human tongue? I thought you were a spy trained by the orcs, said Kurdak with a life. The middle-aged man processed the words and raged. Nonsense. You are the orc spy. Kurdak felt slightly pissed. He had wanted to joke with the man. It was one thing if he had mistaken it for an accusation, but he even accused him in return. Was this how a person should talk to their savior? Listen to yourself. With how weird you sound, you expect us to not suspect you, snapped he. I only didn't use common tongue for a long time. Getting rusty, muttered the man. Then, I was just making a joke. The middle-aged man's face flushed with fury. But due to having his hands and feet bound, there wasn't much he could do. Kurdak patted his shoulder. I say, my friend, we're the ones who saved you, you know. At the very least, introduce yourself. The man humphed coldly. I didn't ask you to save me. You can leave me where you found me. Kurdak jumped with anger. Hey, aren't you a stubborn old fool? Your common tongue is turning fluent the more you argue with me. You really think I wouldn't dare to throw you back to the orcs? Let me warn you, you won't even have the luxury of crying. Boss, don't be rash. Haste makes waste. We just got to know him. You don't need to get mad at him. Anger is bad for health, interjected Leguna hurriedly. The middle-aged man gave Kurdak a glare before shutting his eyes without saying a word, as if he couldn't care less about whether he lived. Seeing the old man's obstinacy, Kurdak couldn't be bothered to deal with him. Leguna found it rather funny that his boss and the old man fought for no reason in particular. He put up an innocent and bright smile as he spoke the man. Nice to meet you, mister. I was the one who saved you last night. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about yourself. What's it to you? The old man sounded completely fluent in the common tongue already. Leguna clicked his tongue and patiently wore an even brighter smile. Well, mister, since I was the one who saved you, knowing more about you will help me decide what I should do with you, don't you think? I know you're the same as him. The middle-aged man said as he pointed at Kurdak, before he laughed and mocked. You're still acting cute despite your age? Don't you feel the least bit embarrassed? Tui. Kurdak spat out a mouthful of water the moment he heard what the man said and struggled to cough and laugh at the same time with his body contorting awkwardly. God damn! Cursed Leguna with bloodshot eyes as he brought out Flameblade. As he waved it around, he said, Geezer, aren't you as hard to crack as a rock in a lavatory? I already tried my best to try and talk to you all friendly. When did I ever act cute? You think you can pretend to be the mature old dude with your messy beard? Why don't I give you a hand in trimming it? Let me tell you, I've claimed almost 100 orc lives with this blade. I sure hope my hand doesn't slip when help trim your beard and add a human's head to that count. When Kurdak saw how pissed Leguna was, he tossed his flask away and laughed out loud as he rolled on the floor uncontrollably. Sheesh, what's with the noise this early in the morning? Can't you let others sleep in peace? Said Vera as she walked out of the tent with droopy eyes. Kurdak struggled to stop his laughter. Well, Lay saved a human yesterday, and the old geezer's acting all stubborn. He's not willing to answer anything we ask. Huh, to think there's such a weird person, Vera said as she rubbed her eyes. Let me take a look. Vera, asked he after he saw the woman. The middle-aged man's body tensed up the moment he heard her voice. When Vera heard the man's voice, she stiffened as well. It was the voice that had accompanied her for more than a decade of her life. It was deeply ingrained in her memories, filled with both expectation and caution. As if she was afraid of popping the bubble in front of her, she slowly turned to the source of the sound. F.A. Father, muttered Vera. A moment later, tears streamed down her face. F.A. Father, exclaimed Leguna and Kurdak with their mouth agape, muttering even heavier than she had. Vera, is it really you? The middle-aged man struggled to stand up, but was ultimately unable to, given that both his hands and feet were bound. Noticing that something was off, Leguna hurriedly used his dagger to sever the ropes binding the man's legs. While Vera had already made the identity of that man known, he didn't release the bindings around his hands as a precaution. Father, greeted Vera as she cut off the ropes binding his hands without hesitation. She observed him closely. 9 years had passed, and the man was no longer as glorious and tough as he had been back then. His hair had also whitened considerably. Vera, didn't you? The man stuttered as he tried to ask whether Vera was dead, but he didn't dare say it, as if the act itself was a curse that would make it become true. Understanding what the man meant, she shook her head. No, back then, Big Brother stopped the orcs and allowed Baylor and I to escape. Baylor's alive, asked the man as excitement flashed through his eyes. Where? Where's he? Vera was initially speechless, but she steeled her courage in the end and told her father everything. So that's what happened, said the man with a nod. Looking at Vera's eyes, red from crying, he consoled. It's not your fault, my child. I'm already thankful that you, my soul kin, are still alive and well. But you actually have too, thought Leguna. He was tempted to tell them the truth when Vera was recounting her experiences, but he managed to suppress the urge after much hesitation. Seeing how apologetic Vera looked, the middle-aged man didn't want to dwell on the past any longer. So, he changed the subject. What happened afterwards? Where did you go, and how did you end up here? Vera wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. After that, I escaped to Starfall and met 2 mercenaries. I joined their party and have been with them ever since. Just recently, Eye of Arcana offered a bounty in exchange for orc ears, and the Flatlands have become a war zone. That's why we're here. What about you, father? How have your years been? The middle-aged man nodded. Back then, I set out to hunt and encounter a rather decent prey. So, I followed it a little further than I usually would. But when I made it back home, I saw that horrid scene. I was so desperate, I went all over to look for you, but I could only find your mother and elder brother's corpses in the end. The man paused from the anguish he felt at recalling what had happened. After regulating his emotions, he continued. After that, I buried the 2 and set out to look for the 2 of you. But after a year of fruitless searching, I despaired and gave up all hope. So, I brought my belongings and barged into Orcish territory and started killing everything in sight. That's how I've spent the last 8 years. His audience was shocked. Vera's father had survived alone inside the orcs' territory for 8 years. They couldn't imagine how he'd spent all that time. How did it feel for him to be able to resist the endless loneliness and fear that came with surviving alone in Orcish territory? Father, the middle-aged man smiled warmly before a trace of hatred flashed across his eyes. They took everything from me, so I wouldn't let them rest peacefully even if it cost me my life. I'm a bad daughter for having let you suffer all this time, muttered Vera. She appeared on the verge of tears again. I'm the one who's failed my responsibility as a father. I couldn't even protect my family. Tears could be seen welling up in the corner of the old man's eyes. While he had wanted to hug Vera and cry together to vent his pent-up feelings, he didn't feel it was appropriate after noticing the 2 spare wheels staring at them dumbstruck. Looking at the 2 jokers, the man humphed and said in a mocking tone, So, these are your 2 mercenary friends? It seems that they've saved my life too. Since Vera didn't know what happened before she came over, she thought her father wanted her to introduce them to him. She pointed at Leguna. This here is Leguna, our party's assassin. While he looks rather petite, he's rather strong and reliable. Nice to meet you. I'm Leguna, 11th Stratum assassin, replied the kid as he stretched out his hand. Since the man was Vera's father, someone he absolutely could not offend, he quickly forgot about the displeasing interaction they'd had before and offered his greetings. The man wasn't one to hold grudges either. However, after suffering the torturous treatment of the orcs for the last couple of days, he was in a rather bad mood. Given how Kurdak had accused him of being a spy for the ones he hated so much right after he regained consciousness, it was no wonder he lost his cool. Seeing Leguna acting friendly, he thought a senior like him shouldn't concern himself with the previous transgression. With a smile, he said, Nice to meet you, kid. I'm Ferd. Ferd Tricle. Just as Ferd was going to shake Leguna's hand, Kurdak stepped in and made his move. The hunk towering over 1.9 meters knocked Leguna flying 2 meters to the side. Aha! So you're Uncle Ferd. I've long heard about you. Vera brings you up often when we talk. She often tells me about how heroic you were, as well as your magnificent archery skills. Now I finally get to meet the legend himself. Oh, look at how rude I'm being. Let me introduce myself. I'm Kurdak, 24, 1.9 meters, and 104 kilograms. With decent features and a great personality. Not to mention having nothing to do with drinking, smoking, gambling, or prostitution, I consider myself a man among men. Ahaha. Also, I should mention that while Leguna was the one who saved you this time, I was the one who arranged it. I heard not long ago that a human was taken captive by orcs, so I sent him to make a rescue. But never would I have imagined that it would be you. Just look here. Kurdak shook Ferd's hand in the warmest manner as he blabbered on. His look practically spelled, "Uncle, I am one of the best men out there, and nobody else will be any competition when it comes to the position as your son-in-law." Rather disoriented by the furious shaking, Ferd turned to Vera and gave her a look of confusion. Vera explained in an embarrassed and annoyed tone. "This is Kurdak, our party leader. He was the one who took me in back then. While Ferd had traveled alone for 9 years, he was a man of rich experience and had instantly realized the deeper implications of the situation. He gave Kurdak, who was blabbering about like a madman, a blank stare and turned back to Vera. My daughter, you have such an odd taste in men." Vera's face flushed before she gave the incessantly yapping Kurdak an angry punch. Seeing his boss knock him flying and act so friendly with Ferd that he almost seemed like he wanted to kiss him, Leguna couldn't help but feel ashamed. He went forward and grabbed hold of Kurdak's arm. Boss, control yourself. I bet you were never that nice to your own father, right?" "Scram," barked the man as he swung Leguna away before hissing. "It's not like I'll get a wife by sucking up to my own father." Just as the rest were about to get sick of how gross Kurdak was being, something moved in Analot's tent. "Come, father, here's another one of my comrades. She's Anlate. We usually just call her Annie," said Vera, as she interrupted Kurdak to introduce her father to the new presence. Ferd looked at the young maiden and couldn't help but gasp. During the past 2 years, Anlate had only grown to become even more beautiful. Her snowy skin looked so delicate it might crumble from a puff. Her refined features had also shed their childish air and looked alluring with a hint of energy. Due to Leguna and the others' influence, her demeanor had changed quite a bit. While she still retained her cool air, she felt more clever and cunning than she used to. What left the deepest impression on Ferd, however, was her long and gentle, icy blue hair. As she had just woken up not long ago, 2 strands of hair stood unkempt atop her head, giving her an extra airhead charm. "What a beautiful girl," Ferd exclaimed. "It's my first time seeing someone as pretty as you in my long life." "Nice to meet you. I'm Ferd, Vera's dad." Anlate analyzed the surroundings in 2 seconds before she shook Ferd's hand. "Nice to meet you, mister. I'm Anlate." The simple introductions soon concluded. As Ferd was still rather badly injured, Kurdak generously provided 2 bottles of healing potion. Ferd didn't have any trouble accepting the bottles. After all, his daughter was already Kurdak's, so 2 meager potions were nothing much. As it was still rather difficult for Ferd to move freely, the lot decided to return to Starfall. After all, Leguna had netted them quite a few orc ears last night, and their excursion was already more than worth it. Just as they were about to depart, a few silhouettes appeared on the horizon. "Hey, heads up. There seems to be a situation," warned Kurdak. It was a human party, roughly 20 men strong, led by a young, chubby magus clad in a brownish-yellow robe. They were headed for them. "Oh, it's young Master Farsi from Eye of Arcana," said Kurdak with a smile. He was one of the Eye's main targets for development, and it was rumored he was a fire guide. Despite his young age, he was already in the 14th stratum. "Might you be Kurdak's party?" asked Farsi with a friendly smile on his chubby face. Farsi wasn't a tall person, but he was quite chubby. He also looked rather average. But perhaps because of his chubby figure, he radiated an innate friendly and approachable aura. "You're right. I'm Kurdak," answered Kurdak with a nod. The chubby man left quite a decent impression, given that Farsi didn't have the usual arrogant demeanor of high-up magi. It was bolstered by how he looked straight at a Kurdak and didn't let his gaze linger on the 2 beauties in their presence. The group had fought their fair share of fights because of the 2 women. Vera's explosively seductive figure made most drool, while Analot's face could send men down a road of insane desire. The two attracted there quite a bit of trouble no matter where they went. Initially, Kurdak was worried that Farsi would be taken with the two. It would definitely prove quite troubling. However, he learned quite quickly that he'd misjudged the youth. Farsi gave Kurdak a friendly handshake before looking at the four accompanying him. He pointed to Ferd and said a little apologetically to Kurdak, "Forgive me for asking, but while I can recognize the two beautiful ladies, Latte and Vera here, and Mr. Leguna, of course, who might this be?" "Good day. The name's Ferd, a mercenary," greeted the man. "Good day to you too, Mr. Ferd. I am Farsi." "Mr. Farsi, I wonder if our encounter here was a coincidence, or whether you've come to seek us out for a specific purpose," asked Kurdak after the simple introduction. "We just happened to be passing by. The guild had me take a stroll into the depths of the Orcish dominion. Now that you mention it, since we were fortunate enough to meet here like this, I wonder if you would be interested in traveling with us, Mr. Kurdak. I can pay each of you 200 gold as an employment fee. As for the spoils from killing the orcs, I'll just split a third of it with you," said Farsi frankly. Kurdak hesitated before he shook his head regretfully. "Apologies, Mr. Farsi. Mr. Ferd is injured, so we have no choice but to return to town so he can recover safely." It wasn't uncommon for the group to be employed as the vanguard for a larger unit. Additionally, Farsi's offer was incredibly tempting. All he wanted from the party was additional safety at a fee. Usually, Kurdak would have accepted the offer immediately, but he had to refuse because of the presence of his injured prospective father-in-law. However, Ferd humphed, clearly dissatisfied. Given that he had survived alone in Orcish territory, he'd fostered his own sense of pride and obstinacy. A person like that would definitely find it below him to hold back the party in which his daughter was. So, Ferd proclaimed loudly, "There's no need. I may be a little injured, but I'll be fine if my medical expenses are covered. I can fight and travel without issue and will definitely not hold you guys back." Kurdak's eye twitched, understanding Ferd's intentions. But in consideration of his safety, he softly advised him, "Uncle, we're going to head into the deeper parts of Orcish territory. Will you really be all right?" Ferd glared at him. "Kid, don't look down on me. I've also traveled to the depths a number of times myself. Also, I'm a 13 Stratum Ranger, not your average white-haired old guy." "Of course, you're by no means an average old guy, Uncle. You're an impressive and domineering middle-aged man. I'm just a little worried about your injuries. By the off chance anything happens to you, wouldn't it only worry Vera?" "I might be able to resolve your conundrum," said a familiar voice. "Deva, you're here too." Only once he spoke did Kurdak notice his presence. He was in the rear of the group. "Long time no see," said Deva with a warm smile. This genius of his household seemed even more mature and restrained than 2 years ago. "Oh, you're still alive and kicking," poked Leguna as he gave Daver's chest a fist bump. Though their relationship had gotten off a rough start, after spending some time together, Leguna grew quite close to him and was rather glad to see him now. "I won't bicker with you like before, Leguna. You seem to have grown much taller over the years," Daver said as he returned the light punch. Leguna was already almost as tall as him. He used to be someone Daver had to literally look down at, but now, "My height's not the only thing that grew, you know. You'll have something to look forward to if we get into a fight. Come to mention it. Why are you here?" "I'm also a member of the Eye. The guild arranged for me to join Mr. Farsi here to train this Magi squad. He's the captain, and I'm the vice captain." "Ah, I see." Daver patted Laguna's shoulder and nodded to Enlate and Vera before he handed Ferd a bottle of potion. "This is a bottle of enhanced healing. Mr. Ferd, your injuries should only be skin deep, so I believe you can recover quite quickly with this." "This?" Ferd hesitated for a moment. He had heard about how much enhanced healing potions usually cost. It was far too expensive, not something he ought to accept lightly. "Uncle, go ahead and accept it. This way we can accept their request. Just have the price deducted from my share of the pay," said Kurdak in an attempt to get on his good side. With the healing potion, Ferd could recover in half a day. Now that they no longer had any worries, they could accept the request. Not only could they enrich everyone in the party, Kurdak could also appeal to Ferd. Kurdak would naturally not let the chance to kill two birds with one stone pass him by. Are you running a potion charity? Joked Leguna. Our Daver Merchant Guild owns the largest potion shop in Snowrock. Make sure to give us a visit the next time you want to buy some potions, said Daver. Well then, I take it you've accepted my request? Asked Farsi. Kurdak nodded. We do. However, I wonder if you have any other specific conditions of which you'd like to inform us. Well, forgive me if this sounds laughable. The reason I wanted to hire such a strong party is to ensure our safety during the excursion. So, there's no need for you to take point. You may fight however you please as long as you're certain you can protect me and my friend Daver here in times of danger, Farsi explained before he intentionally accosted Kurdak and whispered, You don't even know the half of it. Only Daver and I are worth our weight. The others are completely unreliable. Kurdak wore a smile of understanding and nodded. Your request sounds reasonable. We have deal then. Ah, Mr. Kurdak, ever so the forthright man. Here's your deposit, said Farsi as he immediately took out a large sack of gold coins that sounded to contain 200 from his dimensional pocket. Leguna and Vera couldn't be happier about the profits they were about to make. But Enlate merely stared at Farsi, keeping her thoughts to herself. The girl hesitated before she walked to Laguna's side and whispered, I feel something's off with Farsi. Leguna looked at the fatty in the distance. Aren't you overthinking this? He gives me good vibes, that fatty. According to the reports I've received, that's how he always presents himself. However, I also collected some information about his true nature in a private setting. Do you want to hear? Offered Enlate coldly. Seeing that Enlate was being serious, Leguna wiped the smile off his face and nodded solemnly. All right, I'll take note of him. Don't forget about Baylor. He hasn't caused you any trouble for some time now, warned Enlate again. At the mention of Baylor, Leguna couldn't help but give Vera and Ferd a look. He scratched his head. I was just about to forget about him. Sigh, the days when I was boss's little minion were the best. I didn't have to worry about stuff like this at all. Don't worry, I'll be there to help you, said Enlate, unconsciously when she saw his troubled expression. A little stunned, Leguna snickered. Thanks, I suppose. Annie, you seem rather concerned about me, don't you? I'm only carrying out the assignment the president gave me, retorted she without a change in expression. But Leguna, who was closest to her at the moment, noticed a tinge of pink surface on the maiden's fair skin. It made him fall into a daze despite having gotten used to seeing her face over the last 2 years. However, the others didn't have the leisure to observe the scene. With Vera's help, Ferd drank the enhanced healing potion. As he was injured all over, there wasn't enough of the potion to be applied using the method specified in Wireless's notebook. So, she had no choice but to use it to treat the spot most badly injured. Seeing her father's beaten state, Vera's eyes reddened as she muttered her apologies for having neglected her father all these years as she treated him. As a father, Ferd could only try his best to console her so she didn't feel too bad. He reminded her that his injuries were just skin deep and that there were some occasions when he'd been in a far worse state, but he'd survived nonetheless. His attempts backfired, however, as this reminder made Vera cry even more intensely, much to his panic. Kurdak was busy negotiating the finer details of their cooperation. However, Farsi's gaze would drift away from time to time. Whenever he glanced at Leguna and Enlate, a distinct coldness flashed across his eyes. Though the orcs were a race fond of combat, their inclination towards bronze rather than brains made them rather unfit for survival. While the flatland soil wasn't as rich as those of Azure Water, it was still usable for farming. However, the orcs were completely uninterested in any kind of agriculture. Even though Algerok, who had just recently risen to fame, had tried to plant the wheat he brought in from human territories in the desolate flatlands, the immature agricultural techniques they employed and the slackish mindset of the orcs made the harvests less than ideal. As a result, they had to rely on hunting animals across the flatlands for food. But it was far from enough to sate the food needs of the orcs, a race with great reproductive capabilities as well as a huge capacity for food intake. After he unified the orcs across his territory, reducing the deaths from internal strife, the population only grew. The lack of food and the ever-increasing population troubled the great chief immensely. In that moment, the humans launched their attack. Even though he was infuriated by the provocation, he had to admit that, had it not been for the invasion, a famine across the empire would have been inevitable. Countless numbers of orcs would have starved. While death via battle and death via starvation was still death, the processal difference was important. Any proud orc warrior would pick the former almost on instinct. So, Algerok wasn't in a hurry to end the war. As he carefully controlled the situation, he continued to brainstorm hard for a way to solve the food problem. This was currently the best result for which he could hope. Not only did the war chip away at the population, it also served to polish the survivors' abilities. The flatland's southern part was like a forge. Only the strongest pieces of steel, the strongest pieces of flesh, could survive, could fight for the right to survive, could enjoy the meager rations remaining. While it sounded cruel, it was the best option. Additionally, the orcs who held the maxim "be strong or dead" didn't see their great chief's choice in a bad light. A patrol unit of 200 orcs traveled across the flatlands. Half of the unit were rookie warriors who happened to be the fittest youth picked from their tribes. They were filled with vigor and courage and thought of themselves as proud and prestigious warriors. But to the veterans, they were just greenhorns, little dollies who hadn't killed or spilled blood before. "Moderick, take this more seriously. We're on patrol, going to war. This is not a hunting trip," shouted the leader to a young orc who seemed all too jumpy and growled excitedly all too often, causing the rest of the unit to be rather disarrayed. "But we're about to fight, Captain. My blood's boiling. I want glory and strength. It's waiting for me to take it," roared the young orc. The rest of the young uns following behind roared in agreement. The captain gave him a proud glance. His son was the strongest and largest among the new recruits and would definitely become a courageous and powerful warrior one day. At least, that was what he hoped. Listen well, fellas. For many of you, this will be your first battle. I know you have lots of energy, but battles aren't won with energy. If you want to be recognized by your tribe and be praised by Earth-Shaking Hammer, you have to grow as quickly as possible. Before you can even do that, you first have learned to survive. While the captain had already given them a briefing before they departed, he felt it necessary to repeat some of it after seeing how restless they were. "That's right, Captain. We'll listen to you to survive," continued Moderick, causing the rest to laugh. The captain glanced at the kid annoyed. "Yes, you better listen to me." Before he could finish, the orcs in front roared, "Human squad ahead, Captain." The news shocked him. He had served in the patrol unit for more than a year. Their current location should be safe. But a squad of humans was traveling even this far into their territory. They were a real threat to the inner settlements. He was about to send messengers back to notify the nearby settlements, so they wouldn't be caught unawares. But before he could give the order, the young uns, led by Moderick, had already let out excited roars and pushed the veterans aside as they rushed forward. The new recruits blood boiled under Moderick's lead. They completely ignored their captain and rushed forward with him. "Moderick, come back. All of you come back. Obey me," roared the captain to no avail. The excited young uns completely disregarded their captain's orders. Seeing his comrades rush forward with him, Moderick felt proud of his courage and decisiveness. He would be the first to slaughter the enemy. When he approached the humans, he saw they were only 20. While their weapons and equipment looked exquisite, they seemed small and petite. They left no impression of strength. Most importantly, there were more than 70 comrades behind him. There were only 20-odd humans. The disparity was incredible. He licked his lips. He was impatient for the feeling of hacking into his enemy. Behind him followed the rest of the patrol unit. There was no way the captain would stand by and do nothing, watching as his son rushed to his death. So he decided to mobilize the whole squad. After all, the humans weren't that many. It shouldn't be a problem to completely decimate them. "You're not messing with us, right? Are you sure that many are new recruits?" asked Kurdak with a troubled look as he witnessed the spirited orcs running at them. "You should be more relieved with me taking care of things. I've been tailing them for an hour already. About half were chattering and jumping about. There's no doubt they're new recruits, said Leguna as he smacked his chest audibly. No time to think too much. Let's just kill, said Vera as she took out her enchanted longbow. Given that Ferd was there, Vera wanted to use the opportunity to show her father her growth. She loaded 4 arrows in one go and circulated her impetus before executing the archery skill of which Ferd was most proud, Arrow Storm. For arrows imbued with wind aspect impetus were sent flying. As they were quite far from the orcs, she had shot the arrows in an arc. Even so, 3 orcs lost their lives immediately. Another had his thigh pierced. As the orc was at the front, he fell to the ground immediately and was almost trampled in the stampede. Pleased with his daughter's impressive performance, Ferd didn't reveal a hint of fear or anxiety when faced with the approaching orcs. He actually pointed out the flaws in his daughter's shot in a collected manner. He took out the longbow Kurdak had given him, drew back as far as it would go, and fired 3 arrows. But just as Vera was about to wallow in disappointment over how her father wasn't as good as he was in his prime, Ferd's hands flashed like lightning as they drew and loaded 3 more and sent them flying as well. While the 2 shots of 6 arrows were half a second apart, the arrows began to spread out in the air. Each seemed infused with its own will to seek out its target. The 6 pierced through 6 heads at the exact same moment. Everyone present gasped involuntarily after witnessing Ferd's impressive archery. Kurdak didn't fail to use the opportunity to suck up to him either. He seemed like he was about to beg Ferd to be his teacher. Girl, your dad hasn't been wasting his archery skills in the flatlands all these years, you know, said Ferd gleefully. Mr. Ferd and Miss Vera's archery is really impressive. Money well spent, praised Farsi before he started dictating his spell. 2 seconds later, a cloud of green gas descended from the skies into the horde. More than 20 collapsed immediately and twitched as their mouths foamed. Not long after, they stopped moving altogether. It was a level 5 curse, Death Cloud, one of the most offensive area of effect spells among those of the 5th level. No, roared Moderick in a panic. As he had already been wounded in the leg and collapsed, he was already losing his cool. This isn't what I imagined. He thought he could bust through the small squad's defenses easily with courage and a large number of comrades before tearing them to shreds, but the first wave of attacks from the humans shattered his fantasies in the cruelest way possible. Not only was he among the first to be shot, many more of his comrades died. They had just been discussing their power excitedly a few minutes earlier and how their tribe would shower them with respect after they gained honor in battle. Now they were dead. Before they even got to take a good look at their enemies, they had lost their lives. If his fantasies were coldly crushed by the first 2 waves of arrows, the deadly loud that descended soon after sent him to hell, more than 20 of his comrades died in an instant. They used to be so strong and full of energy as they charged fearlessly with him, but stopped moving in the blink of an eye. Did this happen because of me? Just as Moderick was feeling terrified and remorseful, the orc captain finally caught up. He hauled his son, wallowing on the ground, up and roared. Stand up. Moderick looked at his captain with terror. Father, war. War is scary, stuttered he. But you're a warrior. You're a proud guard of earth-shaking hammer. Stand up. The captain was incredibly enraged at his son's fearful display. Having little time to lecture his kid, the captain pulled him up and began dictating. While the destructive power of Orcish spells wasn't comparable to human spells, high priests of the religion were masters of status augmentation. Oxen might and agility spells could be dictated on hordes of warriors at once. Apart from that, shaman high priests could cast bloodlust spells that allowed warriors to enter a berserk state. Not only could high priests greatly improve the synergy between warriors, they could also dispel the fear and cowardice in them and make them fight with wild abandon. In single combat, a shaman was weaker than a magus of the same stratum. But when the number of combatants increased, a shaman's utility far exceeded that of a magus of the same stratum. Seeing his father boost the troops' morale single-handedly, Moderick gradually regained his confidence. He suppressed the fear in his heart and prepared to rush at the enemy again. However, his captain stopped him. He looked at his child and said in a voice with irresistible dignity, "The battle doesn't need you now. Head back and notify the nearby settlements immediately. They must be wary of this group of humans. No, Dad, I won't run away, objected Moderick loudly with a flushed face. He wasn't sure whether his father was mocking his cowardice. It's Captain. Listen to me, cried the captain. Our home might be in danger. You have to warn them. The captain, I want to stay to fight. However, the captain no longer had any patience. He pushed his son away and roared. This is the most important mission. You're not running away. Remember, you have to complete it even if it kills you. Our home depends on you. After he finished, he stopped bothering with his son and continued to support the unit with his spells. Moderick looked at his father, decided to obey in the end. The first time he disobeyed them, more than 30 of his comrades died, so he didn't dare to do it again. The young warrior gave his comrades, baptized by the human magi's spells, one last look before gritting his teeth and advancing in the opposite direction, dragging his injured leg along. Kurdak's face was completely expressionless as he stared at the approaching warriors. While they were considered strong by normal people, they were just walking ears worth just 5 gold his eyes. He was confident he could turn them into gold, too. The frenzied slaughter of the last 2 years had greatly speeded up his growth. He had successfully entered the 12th stratum and could be considered an expert among mid-order warriors. He was confident he could face off against 10 orcs at once and still win. That aside, the most important factor in his confidence were his comrades. Even after Analot's ability greatly decreased, her talent as a genius magus was surprising, to say the least. Though every member of the party had grown in strength rather substantially, and Latte was still the strongest. He even suspected she could still take on the other 3, Leguna included, even in her current state. Leguna was no longer the kid that had to rely on him for a living. He was a deadly assassin. Other things aside, the fact that he could bring 40 orc ears after a one-man excursion was testament to his growth. He had fought against at least 20 orcs. Even Kurdak had to admit he couldn't deal with so many in such a short amount of time, even with the element of surprise. As Leguna mostly acted alone nowadays, his understanding of the kid's true abilities was lacking. But given that he was a shadow dancer, even if he was weaker than Kurdak, the gap between them was probably not that wide. He even suspected the kid had already exceeded him. Vera was the slowest to improve. However, she was still an incredibly threatening archer. Even though she wasn't well-versed in close combat, the moment she was given a safe and stable vantage point from which to attack, her threat to enemies was second only to Enlate. Her accuracy had been refined to an incredibly high level over the past 10 years, and her 11th stratum impetus infused arrows were incredibly damaging. That was why he didn't fear the orcs in the slightest, even though they outnumbered him 10-1, no matter how ferocious they appeared. Wipe out the orc shaman in the back first. With him around, these fellows' combat ability can be raised up to 4-fold, instructed Kurdak calmly. He knew the moment he gave the order, the orc shaman had less than 10 minutes to live. All right. Leguna stretched his body before retreating to the rear and quietly entering a stealthy state. Annie, Vera, Uncle, cover me. I'm heading off. Kurdak drew his 2-handed sword, the first human to rush into the fray. Kurdak seemed like an indomitable war god as he ran into the enemy's ranks with a great howl. A storm of blood, limbs, and torn flesh spewed forth around him. Seeing how courageous and ferocious Kurdak was, Ferd quietly nodded in approval. Not only does he have a rather complex mind, he also has great leadership and is braver than most. Not a bad fit for Vera, though his looks are a little too distasteful. Even though the thought was a sign of recognition, if Kurdak actually heard Ferd's last comment, he would vomit blood in anger and die on the spot. After all, not looking good wasn't his fault. Good old Kurdak only looked a little rougher than most, but it only added to his manliness, not ugliness. Ferd and Vera were both expert archers. They skillfully sniped the enemies behind Kurdak one after another, allowing him to completely concentrate on the enemies in front of him. Further in the distance, Enlate had unleashed a horrifying wave of magic. A blizzard wiped the orcs off the battlefield, leaving only empty land, while also serving as an obstacle for the orcs further behind. They had no choice but to circle around the area affected by the magic to advance. Farsi looked closely at Enlate, who was controlling large amounts of magical power, before proceeding to unleash his own impressive magical spell so as not to be outdone. Though fire-type spells were inherently more damaging than ice-type spells, the damage Enlate dealt with her spell was staggering, to say the least, and not the least bit inferior to Farsi's. The two geniuses specializing in their respective areas seemed to be competing with each other in a match of slaughter. Daver looked at the two freaks younger than him before smiling exasperatingly as he started dictating enhancement spells. Even the genius recognized as the number one in Snow was a mere sidekick to those two. Leguna slowly approached the orc captain. The shaman was surely no pushover, given that he was capable enough to be given command of a company. Otherwise, the orcs who worship power above all else wouldn't submit to him. Even so, he was confident he could kill him. He had already killed at least 4 or 5 such company captains over the last 2 years. Leguna was armed with Light Eater. Only this sword wouldn't break his cover when he wielded it. He couldn't carry a bright, glowing weapon like Flame Blade casually. The orc captain continued to dictate spells, completely unaware of the encroaching death. When Leguna had circled around to the captain's back, he realized there was another orc limping away not too far in the other direction. While he didn't intend to spare it, dealing with the shaman was his main priority. The youth acted. He broke out of stealth when he was 2 meters away. This was the perfect distance to launch a strike, based on personal experience. If he was too far away, his enemy would easily escape. If he was too close, he'd be discovered before he could act. Light Eater cut through the air and arced towards the orc's neck. It was a perfect strike. However, the captain turned back to check on his son the moment Leguna lashed out, allowing him to dodge. Light Eater cut its cheek and blood streamed down its face. Though the orc's face was disfigured, with its teeth visible to the eye, the strike wasn't fatal. The surprise attack only yielded mediocre results, causing Leguna to furrow his brow. However, his figure didn't remain in the same spot for more than a moment. The instant he realized things hadn't gone as he'd planned, he entered close combat with the shaman. Even though magi and shamans were both spell users, shamans' constitutions were unlike that of physically weak magi. Shamans could still fight decently in close combat. Armed with Flame Blade in his left hand and Light Eater in his right, Leguna parried the orc's axe. He used Light Eater for the parry and Flame Blade, held closely against his arm for the counterattack. It was a skill Arikos had taught him. By holding the blade against the arm, the enemy would have a hard time seeing where it was and couldn't predict which direction the attack would come from based on how the dagger was angled. Though the shaman performed surprisingly well in close combat, it didn't last long against Leguna, who had been trained excessively by Moonshadow. Not only was the direction of his attacks hard to predict, his footwork and attack speed were ethereal and hard to discern. The battle's pace oscillated between fast and slow under Leguna's control, and the shaman found it very difficult to attune to it. The most stunning part was that the youth possessed a terrifying calm. The shaman found the youth didn't commit any mistakes during the fight. The combination of an eerie combat method, an incredibly tempered mind, and a fearsome amount of experience put immense pressure on him. As a result, he lost his focus for the slightest moment. The trajectory of the lightning bolt he unleashed to force Leguna back was off by the slightest of margins. Leguna only had to sidestep to avoid it before resuming his ferocious assault. He parried the axe with the sword in his right hand and half a second later cut through the orc's throat. He could speed up even further. Was he hiding his true strength all along? The orc's lasso echoed in its mind.